Miniature armies, the Emperor spoke. Blood red, death screen, shadows cloak in the grim dark future. Wash runs deep like battle scars. Highlights gleam like burning stars. 1,000 points, a tabletop war. Each detail sharper than before. Layer the pain, edge the fight. Bring the battlefield to life tonight. Paint the wall, stroke by stroke. Miniature armies, the Emperor spoke. Blood red, death green, shadows cloak in the grim dark future.
What is up, you guys? Here we are. We're back. We're back at the painting. We're going to continue the painting madness. Got to set up a little bit more, but we're on it. We're doing it. We're here. Hope everybody's doing well. Chilling. Grab your drinks, your snacks, and all your paint party hangout enhancers. We're going to listen to some more of the 40K stories online. Listen to that and get our painting in. A couple more things I need to do to set up, but for now we're gonna listen to some story time. Yeah. Feel the music for now. Start up story time.
They call me shameless gambler. They call me reckless menace. They call me murderer. Do they not understand what is at stake? What is the loss of 1 billion souls against extinction? What is the loss of 1 trillion, 1 quadrillion more yet? When doom is the alternative, we must be willing to pay any price. It is a simple question of logic, one that my former peers refuse to acknowledge. They do not realize that it is the Inquisitor's sacrifice to lose their humanity in order to save the species. There is no room in this galaxy for thoughts of compassion, mercy, or kindness. Not for those of us with knowledge. That gift and curse both. Instead, there is naught but duty. Humanity will only survive by the actions of those with hearts of ice and stone, and minds of sharpened steel. I am no gambler, menace, or murderer. I am an assessor of the facts, and a taker of action. Those who scorn me will see that I am right before all this is done. Former Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos. Warzone Octarius. Warzone Octarius is a vortex of whirling and anarchic conflict. For years, the orcs of the Octarian Empire and the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan have slaughtered each other in droves. As the orcs grow stronger on a diet of carnage and war, so the Tyranids match their increasing might by consuming ever more biomass. Should the Xenos Wars spread, or either side emerge victorious, neighboring systems will face a terrible threat.
Yeah, buddy.
This war was not a spontaneous event, driven by bestial and primal instincts of alien species, but was manipulated into being. Bringing these two forces into conflict was the design of Inquisitor Fidus Cryptman of the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitor Cryptman was an expert on the Tyranid threat, having already played a role in the wars against High Fleet Behemoth and Kraken. When High Fleet Leviathan attacked the galaxy, once again Cryptman fought against them. After many battles, Cryptman conceived a plan to slow the advance of one of the High Fleet's tendrils. This involved carrying out Exterminatus, the act of wiping out all life on worlds in the tendril's path, as well as those already being invaded. Cryptman's goal was to deny the Tyranids biomass, as well as inflict significant losses upon them. While successful, this strategy cost hundreds of billions of Imperial citizens their lives. For his actions, Cryptman was stripped of his title and forced into exile, but his determination to halt and defeat High Fleet Leviathan ran deep. Soon he had forged another, more daring plan to achieve this. In the past, Cryptman had observed orcs and Tyranids fighting each other, and he had marveled at how costly the conflict between the two races had been for both. Knowing the orcs of the Octarian Empire were winning their war with the Imperium, Cryptman wanted to bring High Fleet Leviathan into conflict with them. Enlisting the aid of his few remaining allies in the Death Watch, he captured a brood of gene stealers and sent them into the Octarian Empire aboard a Space Hulk. The plan was a success. Within a short time, dozens of orc worlds had gene stealer infestations. A tendril of High Fleet Leviathan speared deep into Greenskin space to the rich feeding ground it offered. And for their part, the orcs were jubilant. Many grew huge on the diet of constant warfare, and the greatest fight of their lives was on their doorstep. Imperial worlds on the border of the Octarian Empire were granted a reprieve from attack as the Greenskins sought bigger and better fights against High Fleet Leviathan swarms. On the other side, the Tyranids consumed colossal quantities of orcs to produce ever more and ever more diverse bioforms. Both sides were growing stronger rather than weaker. In the eyes of many observers, Cryptman had at best delayed the inevitable.
Cheers, you guys.
At worst, he had created a monster that the Imperium could not hope to defeat. The Cordon in Penetra. Cryptman's actions brought fierce criticism from military commanders, planetary governors, and inquisitors alike. To them, he had ignited an inferno that would inevitably consume all around it. It was a problem that had to be resolved, and though many ideas were advanced in various corners of Imperial strategic thought, one achieved dominance over the rest. The Cordon in Penetra was the brainchild of Inquisitor Nashir
gold.
Sahanson of the Order Xenos,
Black.
a dogged and vocal critic of Cryptman. Never convinced that the Octarian Orcs or Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan would wipe each other out, he spent every waking moment working with generals, admirals, planetary governors, Space Marine chapter masters, and Death Watch masters to bring them over to his cause. Sahanson argued that Every world near the Octarian war zone had to be prepared for what he saw as the inevitable victory and full-scale breakout of one of the warring Xenos races. Sahunsun drew a sphere around the outer borders of the Octarian Empire. Every subsector that bordered the outside of this sphere was part of the Cordon Impenetra. It was a merciless idea. All the systems outside the line were to be protected and reinforced. All those within would be abandoned to their fate. The area enclosed within the sphere was approximately the size of an average Imperial sector. Sahunsun received much criticism for the idea, with many calling it no less ruthless than anything Krypton had done. In return, Sahunsun argued that most of the systems to be abandoned were either in the process of falling to the Orcs and Tyranids anyway, or expected to within a short space of time, based on projections calculated by his agents. These worlds would receive no more resupply or reinforcement. Instead, efforts were only made to evacuate key military forces, essential personnel, and sacred artifacts. Many of these missions were done in secret, so as not to warn planetary leaderships, either in the dead of night or under the guise of emergency reassignment. But some individuals refused to leave, their sense of honor holding them where they were. Corruption was rife. For every 2 vital people successfully brought to safety, a vacuous politician or self-important bishop bribed their way to an escape from inevitable doom. Some of those successfully evacuated never reached their designated safe world, lost in the warp or destroyed by pursuing Xenos. Only one system within Sahunsun's lost space was retained as part of
a little painting with some story time.
Impenetra, Sigma
Party.
Ostari. Such was the Forge system's output, it was deemed essential to continuing Imperial war efforts. It also provided a vital link in communicating with Imperial worlds within the space contained by the Cordon Impenetra. The inhabitants, though abandoned, were largely unaware of that fact, and their desperate calls for aid provided vital intelligence on Xenos activity while their worlds still stood. Those planets that bordered the territory Sahunsun declared lost, and who agreed to be part of the Cordon, were named Warden planets. They were to fortify themselves against incursions, search for Xenos movements, and report them to other Cordon worlds. They were also expected to launch attacks into the abandoned space. It was vital to the Imperium that the Orcs and Tyranids were kept in a state of stalemate for as long as possible. And so, Imperial forces launched raids to ensure that neither Xenos race gained clear advantage in any given area. Officially speaking, Imperial policy was one of aggressive containment, though some governors and military officers emphasized aggression over containment. Space Marine chapters and Death Watch fortresses also made pacts with Sahunsun. They pledged to conduct strikes of their own and maintain force readiness in order to deal with any Orc or Tyranid breakouts. Chapters such as the Celestial Guard, the White Panthers, and Silver Templars recognized the importance of containing the Xenos threat. So too did the Death Watch of the Eye of Octus, Faror, Shield, and other watch fortresses. Attempting communication in and around the Cordon was particularly arduous. The Great Rift caused immense difficulty, and due to the large concentration of Tyranids in the region, the shadow in the warp was particularly strong. The war energy created by the vast hordes of Orcs also distorted communications, with astropaths seeing vast fields of green in their dreams. It was all but impossible for transmissions to go through the area of space Sahunsun declared lost. Instead, for a world to contact another on the far side of the sphere, transmissions had to go around it. Should a link in the communication chain fail, information could only be relayed by rerouting it. Sahunsun knew this was a significant vulnerability and endeavored to bring additional astropaths to the Cordon. He failed. Demand for astropaths was enormous throughout the Imperium since the opening of the Great Rift. Sahunsun had his detractors. Some generals and admirals believed that the rate at which the Octarian Xenos grew stronger was faster than the Imperium's ability to build up its resources in the Cordon. It was the belief of many that the Imperium needed to make a decisive strike sooner rather than later, to shatter the Xenos before they turned on mankind's defenses. Saren Sun was well aware of his opponents and their views, and feared greatly that all would be lost if Segmentum Command did not have unity of purpose. He was concerned that desperately needed troops could be wasted in large assaults that could never win, or that the actions of some foolhardy officers could even unintentionally provoke a large-scale Xenos attack. To Saren Sun, progress was not remotely fast enough. Even after years of build-up, the Cordon's defensive capabilities had barely reached 50% of the level he believed was the minimum necessary to withstand a sustained Xenos attack. Then, without warning, came the Pancalis breakout, and his fears proved true. Inquisitor Nashir Saren Sun. By the time he devised the Cordon in Penitra, Nashir Saren Sun was very old, preserved only by extensive rejuvenant treatments and bionics. In his younger years, he had been an aggressive inquisitor. Some of his colleagues referred to him in those days as the Scrapper or the Brawler, given his propensity to lead his agents on violent missions from the very front to fight tooth and nail with Xenos and Xenos sympathizers alike. Saren Sun's methods were highly effective, and he soon won respect from not only his peers, but Astra Militarum generals, Navis Imperialis admirals, and even Space Marine captains. In time, this goodwill proved to be of great use, as he worked ceaselessly to build the Cordon. In later life, he was hideously wounded, fighting the Hrud infestation of Chinkara. Such were his injuries that it took several years for him to fully recover, and he was left no longer able to fight. With a heavy heart, he turned his life to being the student of war and strategy. Though many of those he petitioned about the Cordon considered him to be a relic of the past, many more still had his masterworks in their libraria. Great works, such as How We Broke the Vilginiad, The Ways by Which We Cleanse the Stars, and of course, the seminal Bring Them Death, The Recapture of Intocles' Heel. All of these works remained great treatises of war, and for that, Saren Sun had the respect and ear of many commanders. The Pancalis breakout. The event so many feared came to pass. Orcs and Tyranids in the Octarian space surged against the Imperium, attacking the Pancalis subsector with little to no warning. No planet, no organization was ready. There had been no reported buildup of Xenos near the Pancalis subsector. Neither Orcs nor Tyranids were deemed dominant enough to turn against Imperial worlds in strength. The staff of Imperial commanders could only offer hypotheses. Multiple accounts of deadly warp phenomena implied the involvement of the forces of the arch-enemy, but it was impossible to say if the Xenos attacks were some byproduct of this or a calculated component. Some strategos suggested the Xenos were running from warp forces deeper in Octarian space, or had been spat out by warp fluctuations at random. The attacks came against the Pancalis subsector, with many systems embroiled in conflict simultaneously. While a large proportion were warden planets, most had yet to significantly build up their defenses. With so many worlds facing attacks at any one time, few were free to reinforce others. Some worlds had to contend with internal threats also, such as mountainous Darkmont, holy Ahilmil, and mineral-rich Saint's Blessing, all facing Genestealer cult uprisings. One of the few advantages the Imperium had was that its enemies were as eager to fight each other as Imperial forces. The Orcs of Stugbrog the Facegrinder smashed into the Semithis system, overwhelming the feral world of Tylum and the death world of Nazca. The fortress world of Keist held on for longer, but it too was broken. Imperial resistance continued after this, but the system was effectively conquered. Bored now, the fighting was done, Stugbrog moved much of his forces to attack the Karnak system. War boss Nabrot Stubfingers of the Death Skulls was also at large in that system. He had fought against the Tech Magi of Karnak III in the past and wanted to conquer their world for good, stealing everything he could put his acquisitive claws on in the process. Kuzalst was the final system to be attacked by Greenskins, led by the Goth war boss Kagrit the Redtooth. Leviathan swarms descended upon the systems of Anilani, Bianzes Hollow, and Gaidisk. In the Gaidisk system, the Tyranids consumed their way through the ancient Iron Beach forests of Gaidisk Tertius, the great sauropod migrations of Gaidisk Alpha, and the mega fungi caves of Gaidisk Quartus, and the steam-powered kingdom flotillas of Gaidisk Bataris. Though elements of Imperial resistance remained, the system was also declared lost. On a number of worlds, the defenders faced off against the forces of the arch-enemy. Some remote tribes of Gaidisk Tertius revealed themselves to be followers of the Dark Gods, as did mining clans of Tifali in the Servadosha system. In the Anilani system, the mausoleum world of Karusk even found itself in the grips of a full demonic invasion.
Hello, Truth. Hello,
Among the
here we
first
are.
Imperial responders to these incursions
Thank you for being
were
here.
the Death Watch of Doombreak, Furore Shield, and Eye of Octus watch fortresses. They swiftly called for reinforcements before plunging into battle. Responding to their aid were numerous Space Marine chapters, including the Dark Krakens, Atalantean Spears, and Obsidian Jaguars. Others to respond were the Tech Magi of Ryza and the Forge System of Esteban, each dispatching thousands of macroclades and bringing knights and Titan allies. Classified document 509211X. Dark Kraken Space Marine Chapter. My Lord Critman, please find here a brief account on the Dark Krakens chapter, including details of their involvement in the Pancalis subsector fighting. The full report continues in file 9PF-DRK, Phi Omega. All information is sourced from Agent Omicron 39 Delta, who serves among the crew of the Dark Kraken's flagship. Ever your most faithful servant, JBZ. The Dark Krakens are a Salamander's successor chapter of the Ultima founding. They hail from the world of Nactis, categorized as both a night and ocean world. Almost all of Nactis's marine fauna possess bioluminescent properties. The native population, stretched out over island chains or ship-borne nomadic ocean convoys, are all able hunters with a strong culture of trophy-taking. Through the procurement of teeth, bones, claws, fins, scales, and other body parts, local people and the Space Marines have developed the skills to extract the cells and fluids that give the various creatures their multicolored bioluminescence. The Dark Krakens daub the exterior and interior of their armor, vehicles, and ships with the various colors they collect. Imagine the smell. What a symbol represents will differ depending on its color and that color's hue. Though our agents have been unable to decipher much of it, they believe that the symbols and colors can refer to rank, level of experience, number of kills, celebration of victories, mourning of lost battle brothers, marks of censure for failings, and or even simply aesthetic preferences. Another use of bioluminescent extracts that our agents have observed is to mark routes through the Dark Kraken's ships.
It's getting there.
Which have otherwise been kept unlit.
Little
by
by
Space
little,
Marines,
step by
for the
step.
benefit of their serfs who crew and navigate the vessels. The bioluminescent images worn by the Dark Krakens are only visible in complete darkness. As a result, in battle, they often seek to turn out the lights, for example, by shutting down power in an embattled area, so that their bioluminescent imagery can be seen by the enemy. Many of the Space Marines daub particularly horrifying images on their helmets to inspire terror in their foes, which has often proved to be an effective tactic. The Dark Krakens brought considerable strength to the Pancalas subsector, led by their chapter master, Mizonikai Rio. It seems all of their operations took place in the Bionzeer's Hollow system. Besides duty, the opportunity to claim the trophies of monstrous Tyranids doubtless played a role in their desire to fight there. On Saint's Blessing, Dark Kraken's battle brothers stalked Tyranid lictors that haunted the deep mining shafts. The Space Marines made extensive use of the underground river systems that local miners also use for navigating the area. We believe that on Holy Toil, where great swarms of Tyranids flooded the world's vast plains and quarries, the Dark Krakens established a number of mobile fire bases. They used these to harry the Xenos hordes, and were resupplied on the move by Thunderhawks and other dropships. Examining their actions, it appears that the Dark Krakens were particularly careful to draw the Tyranids away from major settlements. On the frozen death world of Death of Bionzer, it seems that the Tyranids were as interested in hunting the local Urson wolves as they were in consuming the relatively small human population. While Urson wolves are both intelligent and ferocious pack hunters, these alpha predators are also extremely well adapted to hazardous winter conditions. These traits would be valuable genetic material for the Tyranids to absorb, so the Dark Kraken saw to it that, as often as possible, the Xenos were hindered in their efforts. It marks one of the few recorded instances we possess of Space Marines fighting to protect a species of xenofauna. Do-gooders, just like the salamanders.
Hurry up, you fucker. Stupid shit.
Unto the breach. The Gydisk and Semithis systems were declared lost, and many others in the Pancalas subsector were under attack. High Fleet Leviathan fell upon the Analani and Bionzeer's Hollow systems. Greenskins thundered into the Karnak system, and the Qsalt system felt the fury of both species. Not even Inquisitor Sahanson himself had foreseen the first major action of the Cordon to be over such a wide area. Nabrot Stubfinger made straight for the Forge world of Karnak Free. When he entered the Karnak system, it was not the first time he had waged war there, and had learned much of its defences. The war boss was determined that now he would claim it, and all of its loot, for himself. He began his assault by utilizing cruisers and frigates crewed by orcs of the Blood Axe clan, captured in previous wars against the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium. Karnak Free possessed a fearsome network of orbital defences, but Stubfinger hoped their operators would hesitate to fire on potentially friendly targets until it was too late. He was right. The Blood Axes aboard the captured flotilla held human crew at gunpoint, ordering them to speak with the Adeptus Mechanicus defense stations, enter security codes, and request permission to board. All the while, the ships were set on collision courses with the orbital platforms. By the time the Karnak Free Magi realized what was happening, it was too late. The Blood Axes evacuated the vessels aboard rickety dropships, roaring with laughter as the captured vessels careened into Karnak Free's defences. The platforms opened fire, successfully destroying some of Stubfinger's ships, but not nearly enough. Most of the defence stations were destroyed by the vessel's furious impact, and though a handful escaped total destruction, many of these were crippled to the point of uselessness. Hot on the heels of these disguised fire ships came Stubfinger's armada, every ship packed to the brim with boys ready to stomp all over Karnak Free. Stubfingers dispatched forces to attack Karnak 4 at the same time. He had seen the Knights of House Xiphos turn the tide against the Greenskins before, when coming to Karnak Free's aid, and would not allow that to happen again. Stubfingers decided to have Xiphon, the knight's immense fortress, destroyed, knowing it would be the end of the house. Orc ships stormed into Karnak IV's orbit, the greenskins dropping in herds of squigoffs, airborne megafortresses, and big mobs of stompers, morkanauts, and gorkanauts to completely crush House Xiphos. The knights fought valiantly against this onslaught, claiming many greenskin war machines for each fallen noble, but it was not enough. The orcs eventually breached the walls of Xiphon in multiple places. When this happened, defeat was only a matter of time. The orcs attacking Karnak V met stiffer resistance. The penal world's governor, Abrahoma Bental, had spent years amassing an arsenal of weapons and building a large garrison after hearing about massed riots on other prison planets. She joined her world to the cordon without hesitation when Inquisitor Sahunsun approached her. On Karnak V, Stubfinger's attacking orcs met division after division of Aeronautica Imperialis interceptors and huge flak storms. Networks of auguries and auspex systems detected where the greenskins landed. Then Astra Militarum artillery regiments bombarded the orcs' positions and armoured regiments rushed them before the war bosses and knobs could beat some order into their buoys. Imperial forces were winning, meeting the greenskins at every turn with overwhelming force. Alas, it was at this point that the armada of Stugbrog the Facegrinder ploughed into Karnak V's orbit, fresh from the conquest of the Samothrace system. To Stugbrog, it looked as though there was a good fight to be had. He threw his forces into the fray with tens of thousands of battle wagons and battle fortresses. They destroyed fortifications, demolished prison complexes, and slaughtered human and orc alike. In a matter of months, the Imperial garrison had been reduced to a fragment of its original strength, and what was left of Stubfinger's hordes were subsumed into Stugbrog's. The bored war boss moved on quickly, wanting another scrap. This granted a reprieve to what was left of the Imperial forces, but the hordes of orcs Stugbrog had left behind were still far too numerous to be defeated. They wreaked havoc all over the planet, and there was little Governor Bental could do. She saw to it that as many troops as possible were evacuated to Karnak II, or the Servadosha system, with the aim of one day returning, while surviving prisoners were left to their fates. Stugbrog, meanwhile, turned his eyes to Karnak III, where Stubfinger's boys were causing widespread carnage. Stugbrog's armada of space hulks and crewed vessels arrived as reinforcement ships from the Forge world of Ryza were deploying their forces. He caught them off guard, and Ryzen transports were destroyed heading to the surface. Entire macroclades of Skitarii were wiped out, having barely assembled into marching formation. Had it not been for the efforts of the Legio Crucius's god engines and a number of Cadian infantry and anti-air regiments, the principal landing zone used by the Ryzen forces would have been completely overrun with hulking scarboys. The fighting raged on Karnak III for many months. The titans of Legio Crucius and Legio Copides duelled mega-gargants over the ruins of the Fane Shrine 21DF-730, desperately fighting to keep them from the great forges supplying the Skitarii and Astra Militarum forces. Skitarii Rangers fought bitter wars, attempting to stop pilfering Deathskull and Bloodaxe warbands from ransacking tech shrines and Sanctus silos. It was a testament to Fabricator General Esmeralda Brinelock's skill that she maintained an ordered defense for such a long time against two simultaneous orc assaults. But there was only so much she could achieve. Brinelock did her best to manipulate affairs so that the competing orc hordes fought each other as often as her own forces. Airborne maniples performed hit-and-run attacks to draw orc forces of different armies into contact with each other, while large Sicarian forces launched feints and raids to provoke the greenskins and draw them away from Mechanicus structures. It was not enough. The orcs numbered in the billions, and many of the Imperial vehicles they destroyed and captured, they repaired and used. They were turning human tanks and flyers against their former owners. At such a rate, it almost outpaced Karnak III's production capacity. Greenskins rampaged everywhere, with no sign of stopping, and Brynlock realised defeat was inevitable. She made arrangements for a withdrawal, launching campaigns to buy just enough time for precious technologies to be evacuated to safety. Brynlock also committed hundreds of macroclades to desperate rearguard actions, condemning millions of her troops to death in an attempt to allow space for the rest of Karnak Free's remaining strength and knowledge to escape. Some of Karnak Free's tech magi and their enclaves made for the as yet unengaged Karnak II. Brynlock went to the Kusolst system with as many troops and heavy weapons as she could. From there, she could launch a counterattack to reclaim her world when she had regrouped, and by aiding the defences in the Kusolst system, she would have the leverage to secure allies to help her do so. The Siege of Anilani. High Fleet Leviathan attacked all of Anilani Systems' worlds at the same time. Rich in biomass as they were, all made right targets for the Tyranids' ravening swarms. The Cardinal world of Frankis, the Mausoleum world of Karusk, and the Shrine world of Ahilmil were not especially well militarized. Many of their defense forces were overstretched, attempting to quash heretical cults and nests of Xenos-worshipping fanatics. The insurrections they faced had been slowly bleeding the garrisons dry, even with reinforcements sent by House Furus of Sorbus and the governor of the fortress world of Vand. When the shadow in the warp fell upon the Anilani system and the Tyranids arrived, the uprisings increased greatly in their ferocity. The Gene-Stealer cultists knew their gods had arrived and battled tirelessly to pave the way for them. Many of those who led the followers of the Dark Gods were driven to insanity by the shadow in the warp. Their acolytes were terrified their deities had abandoned them and fought viciously in an attempt to regain their god's favour. Frankis's skies were filled with flocks of monstrous airborne bioforms, millions in number. In between their sweeping attacks on those below, they perched on the enormous spires of the world's macro-cathedra. The largest of the winged Tyranid beasts toppled immense towers, sending hundreds of tons of marble crashing to the ground, where terrified Imperial citizens fled for their lives. Imperial defense efforts were rendered futile by the sheer scale of the Tyranid invasion. The quad autocannons of Hydra flak tanks were warped to breaking point for overuse, but to no avail. Those that endured exhausted their ammunition supplies in a matter of days without causing any obvious impact to the numbers of Tyranids. Entire divisions of Aeronautica Imperialis aircraft were swarmed by the Xenos and wiped out on their first sorties. Such was the Tyranids' dominance of the skies. The defenders retreated underground into Frankis's crypts and service tunnels. There they fought a war of an altogether different kind, against Hive Fleet Leviathan's vanguard organisms. In just one incident on Kurusk, a tunnel-boring Tyranid monster the size of a mad train demolished the city-sized memorial to the family of Cardinal Heraclius into an underground reservoir. Those that were not killed by the falling statuary and masonry were drowned in the dark waters or consumed by aquatic Tyranid bioforms that had taken over the depths. Cerberus was subjected to a weeks-long spore mine bombardment. Biological explosives, many as large as combat walkers, destroyed fortifications and rendered movement outside the strongest bastions all but impossible. The constant deafening noise of the barrage drove many to insanity. It was impossible to resupply those holdouts that lacked large reserves of food or ready access to a water source. When the bombardment ended, any sense of relief on the part of the population was soon wiped away as Tyranid spores filled the air and the Xenos made planetfall. Even after this, the Tyranids' intense use of spore mines did not cease. Large biovore and Exorine broods played a significant role in later battles, as their accurate fire made it all but impossible for infantry forces to adequately support the Knights of House Faurus. This made the Knights vulnerable, and many were overwhelmed or the sheer weight of enemy numbers. The fortress world of Vand was enormously strong. Its ruling family had been building citadels, stockpiling armaments and training soldiery long before Cryptman's gambit. They had feared and prepared for orc invasions from the Octarian Empire, and Van's accumulated strength was just as valuable against the Tyranid swarms. Enormous shield generators made spore mine bombardment fruitless. Well-drilled anti-air gun crews shredded invasion drops. Ferrocrete foundations of walls and bastions were hundreds of meters deep, all but impenetrable to tunnelers. Strong transport networks, combined with a large number of Chimera and Valkyrie transports, ensured that troops could be deployed where and when they were needed. Dense walls and powerful defensive batteries made frontal assaults suicidal, even for Bio-Titans. But the Tyranids adapted. Landing in the inaccessible peaks of the Sky-Pierce Mountains, they deployed large numbers of Zoanthropes, Neurothropes, Maleceptors, and even larger psychic biomonstrosities. These masses attacked small defensive outposts, using swarms of lesser Tyranid bioforms as living shields, alongside the protection of their own warp fields. Thanks to their psychic might, they caused void shields to fizzle out of existence and mighty walls to crack and crumble, while in their wake came fresh waves of beasts that finished off defences and consumed all within. Slowly but surely, the largest citadels were completely isolated. Leviathan could land swarm after swarm, almost without challenge, and consume most of the planet. Then it could turn upon the remaining defenders. Bianzar's Hollow was amongst the least populated systems in the Pancalis subsector, but the system's inhabitants were hardy people. Mountaineers, miners, hunters, and frontiersmen all. They were highly suspicious of outsiders and devout in their faith. Given the harsh conditions many of them lived in, they held especially tightly to the comfort and strength their belief in the Emperor gave them. Though Bianzir's Hollow had heretical cults festering in the depths of its mine shafts, quarries, and far reaches of its frozen tundras, these groups were violently rebuffed wherever they tried to gain a toehold. And despite its low population, Bianzir's Hollow became one of the most strategically vital battle zones in the subsector. It guarded Kusalt's flank, as well as shielded the Octus system, where Inquisitor Sahunsun maintained a significant base of operations. If the Tyranids consumed Bianzir's Hollow, they could overwhelm Imperial defences on Kusalst and cut through to the other side of the subsector. Sahunsun feared that this would create an opening for High Fleet Leviathan to tear into the flanks of both neighbouring subsectors. The defenders of Bianzir's Hollow were resolved that the Tyranids would not defeat them, and use their deep knowledge of each world's terrain to their advantage. On Saint's blessing, the miners had mapped their tunnels extensively, and in the wake of invasion they extended and adapted them. In the Holrunt mining complex, which honeycombed its way beneath the Hashir mountain range, they baited areas with soiled clothing and parts of dead animals or people. When Ravenors and Termagants followed the scent, they triggered booby traps made using demolition packs that collapsed entire tunnels, and drills set to churn down closed shafts and reduce any Tyranids within to pulp. In return, the defenders suffered heavily. As often as the traps worked, the Tyranids identified them, tunneling around them and ambushing Imperial troops waiting to strike. The underground campaign wore on for months, many of the soldiers never once seeing daylight in all that time. They earned the name Tunnel Devils for their actions, and were held in great renown by the other Imperial troops. On holy toil, the quarry's many demolition experts were organized into pioneer brigades. They laced strategic territory, such as mountain passes, with minefields or rigged them with explosives. Using these tactics, they killed many Tyranids in immense rock slides, or herded them into pre-prepared kill zones, defended with pre-zeroed artillery and mortar positions. On Death of Bianzir, thousands of trackers, mounted on sleds, pulled by ice canids, lured swarms of Tyranids onto the Great Lakes of Peldathusa, which had frozen over. Though the lakes were frozen, At that time of year, the ice was both precariously thin and snowed over. To an untrained eye, there was little way of telling the difference between frozen ground and frozen water. The trackers knew the safe routes through the landscape. The Tyranids did not, and hundreds of thousands fell into the freezing waters. As the trackers cheered their victory and offered their praise to the Emperor, a great tide of Xenos beasts surged out of the water unharmed. They tore into the sled teams, slaughtering all but a handful that managed to escape.
You write the words. What if you could hear them as a song? Go to Suno.com, switch to custom mode.
4 Deathwatch watch companies from the Eye of Octus fought in Bayanzer's Hollow, deploying on all of the system's worlds. Among their countless actions, one of the most vital was the defense of a facility on Saint's Blessing, a smelting, distribution, and processing center which also served as a spaceport. The site faced attack from sky swarms, biotitans, hordes of hormagaunts and termagants, as well as subterranean swarms. The Deathwatch utilized Malleus tactics, striking down burrowing Xenos and racing in battle tanks wherever the creatures reared their heads. After slaying the excavating Xenos, Deathwatch kill teams rushed along the Tyranid tunnels, collapsing them with melter bombs underneath the attacking hordes outside the facility. In response, the Tyranids launched hundreds of tunnel raids at the same time, slaughtering countless guardsmen within the facility, before eventually being driven away by more troops that had to be pulled off a major sallying effort. Leviathan bombarded the defenders with ferocious barrages of spore mines, which destroyed defensive positions and inflicted horrific casualties. Under this heavy fire, Deathwatch kill teams calculated targeting telemetry for Imperial counter-battery fire that silenced much of the Xenos artillery beasts. By helping to deal with these threats, other Imperial forces had the breathing space they needed to focus on throwing back the Tyranid frontal and aerial attacks. As the battle wore on and the defenders held, more and more Tyranids were drawn in such numbers that pressure on Imperial forces in other battle zones on the world, and even the system, was reduced. In no small part, without the Deathwatch's actions here, Bayanzer's Hollow would not have been a victory for the Emperor's realm. The Imperium paid a heavy price in the Hollow, however, but the Tyranids were defeated and broken by a combination of strong tactics and sheer stubbornness. Though victory was declared, it would take months, perhaps years, before surviving Xenos were purged from the system completely, and there was no telling if Hive Fleet Leviathan would return. What was clear, however, is that Bayanzer's Hollow desperately needed reinforcement. As things stood, the system could not possibly withstand another such attack. The Kusolst system became the site of the most vicious fighting in the Pancalis subsector. The factorums of the system's capital world, Kusolst Prime, produced vast quantities of arms, and the planetary governor, Helmgort Karst, drew huge armies from the world's near inexhaustible population. Karst wasted little time in joining his world to the cordon and upped his munitions production and troop recruitment appropriately. The other worlds of the Kusolst system all supplied the capital with whatever it needed, and Karst increased quotas for every kind of resource. To enforce these, he deployed hundreds of regiments of his own troops to each world, using his own authority as planetary governor alongside Inquisitor Sahansun's blessing. In return, he ensured all of the system's planets were well provided with void shield generators, heavy weapons, and battle tanks in the event of a Xenos invasion. The Kusolst system was also home to the headquarters of the subsector's Navis Imperialis battle groups. With such assets, it was among the best defended systems in the subsector. It was not an invasion, however, that was the first threat to the system. Karst's regime was oppressive in the extreme, and in the forgotten corners of Kusolst's worlds, the disaffected and downtrodden gathered in increasing numbers. Heretical cults grew in strength and audacity, and gene-stealer cults bred exponentially. These groups waged their own guerrilla wars against each other, as well as the imperial authorities. In turn, Karst ordered crackdown after crackdown, in which many innocents found themselves caught up. Thanks to these heavy-handed tactics, for every uprising quashed, two more rose in its place as citizens grew furious with their leadership. It was during these times that the Tyranids and the Orcs of Kagrit the Red-Tooth surged into the system, the Greenskins arriving within weeks of Leviathan. Karst brought all of Kusolst onto a war footing when the first Tyranids appeared in system. The event his armies had been training for had occurred, and such were his resources that he believed he could win a war of attrition. He also relied on the knowledge that his myriad enemies were as likely to fight each other as his own troops. A standing order amongst his generals stated that they should only intervene in battles between the Xenos if they had already caused significant damage to each other, or if the battle risked escalating to a point where it became so large it was uncontrollable. It was a strategy that worked to great effect. On Darkmont, Genestealer cultists of the Shadow Rock Coil dominated a mountain range known as the Spine. Astra Militarum troops of the Tangar Woad Warriors, Dark Montan Mountaineers, Kusolst, Prime Cannonors. The names are getting me in this one, boys, I have to say. And others had been attempting to exterminate the cultists in the area for months, but to no avail. When reconnaissance units observed approaching Orcs, the Imperial troops quietly withdrew, letting the Greenskins engage the Genestealer cultists. The exhausted Imperial troops rested and reinforced, establishing positions to deal with any Xenos that spilled out of the engagement area. The war was tracked by spies inserted into the mountains and by reconnaissance aircraft. After the Orcs carved huge effigies to Gork and Mork into the mountain's highest peaks, the Astra Militarum commanders surmised the Greenskins had won. When the surviving Orcs left the mountains in search of another fight, they came up against fresh and well-supplied Imperial forces, who surged onto the offensive. They caught the badly mauled Greenskins before they could replenish their own numbers and crush them decisively. The Imperium still suffered great losses, however. Fundil's equatorial marshlands proved all but impossible to defend. The intense heat and dangerous local fauna accounted for as many casualties as the Greenskins, and deployment there was swiftly viewed as, or became, an actual punishment. On Gratu, as much as Imperial forces were relieved by the Tyranid forces consuming Genestealer cultists and heretics, they were driven to near extinction by the Xenos' consumption of local livestock. Entire regiments were forced into months-long quarantines after their troops were found eating Tyranid corpses out of desperation, or even ordered on suicide missions. On Ernwald, a battle between the Tyranids and Orcs bloomed and spread into the outer reaches of a city-sized Factorum, which produced tracks for all manner of Astra Militarum vehicles. The Factorum could not be allowed to fall, so, as super-heavy tanks of the Ultramar Auxilia duelled with mobs of Stompers and Bio-Titan broods, Visburg heavy tracks and Cadian armoured regiments clashed with speed mobs and battle wagons. The battle became a symbol of dogged Imperial resistance, and hundreds of thousands of troops were committed over many months to defend the Factorum. 4 million casualties later, 90% of the Factorum was destroyed beyond repair. But the Imperium was victorious. Had it not been for the constant harassment from various insurrectionists, victory might have been more easily achieved by the Imperium. Enforcers, Astra Militarum kill teams, and Militarum Tempestus hunter-killer squads were all occupied with tracking down guerrillas, when they could have been committed to battle against the invaders. The cults disrupted supply lines, corrupted loyalist forces, poisoned food and water stocks, and ambushed patrols. But their power waned in the ongoing conflict. Sources of recruitment for many cults dried up when Imperial commanders conscripted entire cities into the defense militias wholesale. Others were wiped out by the warring parties. The nature of the fighting on Kusolst Prime was one of long drawn-out battles and desperate defences. It was a costly strategy to attempt to absorb waves of Xenos attackers, but it was successful. The grand citadel of St. Athelstan was destroyed when Biotitans formed a living ladder with their own bodies that swarms of bioforms used to storm over the battlements. The life-giver reservoir of Fundil was polluted beyond recognition by the infighting greenskins that lived on its banks. Despite these losses and setbacks, Imperial forces held and were able to push back. Though surviving Xenos still prowled on all the Kusolst system's worlds, the orbital and ground wars were won. Whether another invasion could be driven back, however, was a different question. Such was the scale of the bloodshed on the Pancalis battlefront that it quickly became known by many as the Pancalis Cauldron. Though scattered Imperial resistance still remained in the Samathis, Karnak, Anilani, and Gaidisk systems, all had fallen completely from Imperial control. Kusolst and Bayanzer's Hollow, however, still held, despite the furious attacks they had both sustained. But it was deemed inevitable by Subsector Command. The new Xenos invasion forces would soon arrive. The defences of Kusolst and Bayanzer's Hollow had to swiftly be rebuilt and their armies reinforced. With Xizor and Servadosha systems readying themselves for invasions of their own, few reinforcements would be found from within the subsector for the most beleaguered of systems. Xizor was the system next in the Tyranid's path after Anilani's defeat, while the Orcs were likely to target Servadosha. If these worlds fell, the Xenos races would break clean through the cordon, and from there would be free to reach any number of vulnerable neighbouring worlds. For Inquisitor Sahunsun, this would pave the way for the two most terrifying prospects of all: the Tyranids tearing through the breach they had formed and looping around the cordon surrounding it, and the Orcs linking up with the huge Orc empire of the Arch-Arsonist of Charadon, creating an unbroken realm of Orc territory that would stretch from the Maelstrom to the far reaches of the Eastern Fringe. Calls for aid had been flowing from the Pancalis subsector since Orcs and Tyranids had unexpectedly, for the subsector's inhabitants at least, flooded the region, and Sahunsun was striving to find more troops from Imperial worlds immediately outside the cordon. Some planets he virtually stripped of all defenders, while others were in the grips of heretical uprisings or Xenos invasions of their own. The Inquisitor travelled further and further afield for reinforcements, even intercepting troop transport fleets en route to other war zones and committing them to the Pancalis Cauldron. How many worlds were at risk of collapse as a result of these actions? Not even Sahunsun knew, but he did not care. He could not afford to. To him, holding the Pancalis subsector was everything. Sahunsun also had to warn other regions of the imminent threats. The Greygar subsector bordered Pancalis and Octarian space. With Gaidisk and Anilani largely conquered, nothing prevented the Tyranids from turning in Greygar's direction. The Hyengard subsector bordered the Pancalis near Samathis and Karnak. If Servadosha, the next most likely target in the Greenskins' warpath, fell, it was only a matter of time before the Orcs sought new battles and piled into Hyengard's flank. Sahunsun despaired. In little less than a year, his great scheme was on the edge of total disaster. Classified document 464744-L. Echoes of Octarius. My Lord Kripman, our emissary network and augury stations continue to provide us with information about the ongoing state of affairs in the Octarian region. See here a select handful of communications and recordings I deem to be of particular interest. More can be found in file 6H7E00. Beta Gamma. Ever your most loyal servant, JBZ. Another raid out of the Tamuxan asteroid cluster. 5 more ships lost, carrying enough arms for 2 regiments. Unacceptable. The Greenskins virtually have free reign. What are the Orcs doing with all that ordnance? Admiral Yahan, ready your war group. Clip 2. We are now a warden planet. Balantha, most beauteous of worlds in the orbit of Lumen Marabilis, is to be fortified. I have ordered the messes of St. Crudel, once a place of natural wonder and sanctuary, be turned into a quarry, so that we may build battlements and walls. The great plains are to be made into industrial quarters for our arms. Our people, so talented in celebrating the Emperor through music and art, will be trained for war. As I write, hundreds of thousands are in training camps. Our wondrous gardens are turned over to crop growing to feed ourselves. We destroy our world to save it. Will it be enough? Clip 3. The entire city is empty, my lord. Searches for survivors continue, but we expect to find few more. We have perhaps 300 out of some 800,000 who lived here previously. Those lucid enough to talk tell us of pale-skinned raiders wearing armor with fitted blades, who laughed at the cries for mercy and sailed air barges. We can find no trace of this enemy, nor is there any kind of trail to follow. Not one of the city militia remains. With the city empty, the Haskar Pass is now unguarded. Request reinforcements of the city before the orcs return. Clip 4. Nashir, it was bittersweet to hear from you. I will never tire of our discussions on the best practices of warfare, but I was very much alarmed by your news of the state of affairs in the Octarian Empire. I cannot agree more with your conclusions, which were sage and pertinent. Please consider the entire Vargol system a part of your cordon. I have ordered the immediate raising of an additional 200 regiments and the fortification of my cities. Enforcers are conducting crackdown sweeps with Adeptus Arbites support to ensure our underhives are cleansed. Additionally, munitions production quotas are to be increased. I give you my word, good friend. Hatusha will be ready. Clip 5. The Hera jewels toppled the monoliths while the structures were still rising up from the ground. They threw themselves at the Xenos architecture over and over again until the buildings were ruined. We considered the fight over. The Necron's ascension largely halted. Reports from other units told similar stories, but more and more kept rising. The Tyranids could not bring them down fast enough. Hordes of android warriors marched from beneath the ground, firing. They brought the monsters down, one by one. Clip 6. Sire, the long-range scans confirm it is an Aldari fleet. I could not have believed it, had I not seen the heterospectrometry itself. We have cross-referenced all of the ident markings and believe it is a 59% match with those of Craftworld at Kinshara. What their purpose is I cannot say, but we must warn the Salancia system. They will need to mobilize everything and be ready to defend the dig site. My lady, there are 3 ongoing riots in Hives Belline, Tristal, and Kuinis. They are resisting the mobilization. The 4th was quashed by the swift action of enforcers in Hive Jelan. But it is certain that trouble will begin anew when the citizens' enlistment adjutants are deployed there again. It is due to these actions that we met only 37% of the recruitment quotas, and so rightly established. The people resist demands to serve you and their emperor. They reject sensible rationing of food and water. What are your commands? Clip 8. Lord Inquisitor, this is Sergeant Hamis of the 82nd Ypsiloni Sabertooths. We have successfully infiltrated the Octarius system. As expected, there is much evidence of Orc and Tyranid conflict. More troubling are the signs that heretics and traitors have been here in large numbers. We have discovered chain axes, red and brass armor, and millions of skulls. I have no idea where they have gone, but this is not our primary concern. Fresh waves of Tyranids are coming. Many of them. Excerpt from log 273BHG. This war has proven highly profitable. People will give much indeed to get themselves out of the way of the Tyranid Hive Fleet tendril or the warpath of an Orc horde. The inspectors who check our holds are nervous and distracted, very afraid themselves. They don't look hard enough to see our secret cargo. Some of the people we transport are jubilant, some are terrified, others are different. It is as if they are driven by a purpose besides survival. I have my doubts about them, but they do pay very well, and discretion is my speciality. If they prove to be a danger, let them be dealt with wherever they end up. Besides, with many of my ships evacuating refugees, transporting troops to help the Imperial Navy, and even committed to fighting, no inspector or enforcer dares challenge the sincerity of my motivations. Undoubtedly, working within grey areas of the regulations is lucrative. Being seen to do one's duty so publicly ensures even the most suspicious dissuade themselves from looking too closely at my activities, and so my risk is minimized to nothing. Falamore, rogue trader. The Valoria expedition. Inquisitor Aphocles Van Roth was as concerned with the situation he described as Critman's madness as Sahansun. Not enthused by Sahansun's idea of a fortified border and believing that the threat of the Orc and Tyranid war needed to be neutralized, he looked desperately for solutions. For years he searched in vain, but then, as if by divine providence, two vital discoveries were made known to him. Whilst on a destabilization raid in the Octarian Empire, Deathwatch kill teams of the Eye of Octus discovered an Orc mechanic invention that disrupted the synaptic signals controlling and coordinating the Tyranid swarms. The device appeared much like a crown of electricity and was used by the self-appointed King Mech Bad Crasher to break swarm after swarm of Tyranids. The Deathwatch from Watch Company Secundus, under the command of Watch Captain Deux Glycus, successfully seized the device, with it still firmly attached to the brute's cranium, after plunging directly into the midst of battle between the Greenskins and Tyranids. Glycus took the device to Van Roth, who had for many years been a firm ally of the Eye of Octus. The Inquisitor relayed reports from his considerable network of agents to the Deathwatch that aided in their destabilization missions. On more than one occasion he had deployed gunships to extract Deathwatch battle brothers thought trapped or lost in immensely hazardous battle zones. Above all, Glycus trusted Van Roth's deep hatred for the Xenos, and his wish to see all aliens exterminated. The Watch Captain showed the Inquisitor pre-recordings of Bad Crasher's crown at work, and the effect it had on the Tyranid swarm. Van Roth was astonished. It was a weapon unlike anything he had ever seen. If they could somehow use the technology, they could not only change the Imperium's fortunes in the Octarian War, but all over the galaxy. Van Roth persuaded himself of this easily, having long seen the benefit of using alien technology, under proper controls, of course, against Xenos races of all kinds. Glycus was more reserved, concerned that the taint of using this device could haunt him forever, regardless of how successful it was. But he relented, believing that saving the Imperium from a threat as great as the Tyranids was a curse worth the risk. With the alliance of the Deathwatch secured, Van Roth set about collecting test subjects and handed over the crown to his most learned agents to study. The next challenge was where to test and use the crown. It was a question that plagued Van Roth for many days. Then he remembered it. A distress call. It had come from the Octarius Belt, an area he believed to be devastated in its entirety by the Ashuriani of Craftworld, Samhan, and Bealtan. Yet, this is the area from which Inquisitor Avon Muir had sent her call. Van Roth had experienced disagreements with her in the past, and, given his many priorities elsewhere, he had ignored her plea. Muir's safety was of little concern to him, but the content of her message suddenly held more value. The Eldari maiden world of Valoria, where Muir had been, was completely isolated thanks to the Eldari's efforts to purge the Octarius belt of life. Any Tyranids and Orcs who fought there fought in isolation. It was a perfect testing ground. Van Roth believed that he and his allies could operate there without fresh alien invasions disrupting their efforts. Fully galvanized, Van Roth knew he needed an army. Though brave and skilled, the Death Watch alone would be insufficient for the tasks ahead, so he reached out to other allies and contacts. Van Roth kept records of combat units with experience fighting various alien races as a matter of course, in case he had need of them. Now he used his resources in full. He summoned numerous Astra Militarum regiments, sent secret missives to clades of Tech Magi he had worked with in the past to study, experiment on, and purge Xenos species, and gathered various Militarum Tempestus forces. These forces included elements of the Thetoid Griffones, who had great experience fighting Orc speed freaks on Welbeck II, the 54th Piscian Jackals, who had superb knowledge of Eldari maiden worlds, and the 17th Zion Pythons, who had conducted numerous destabilization missions against High Fleet Leviathan in the Octarian Empire. Van Roth also called upon Free Blade Knights he knew possessed a deep hatred for the Xenos, such as Impervious Rex, the Scarred, and the White Warden. After finding swift and well-armed Navy void ships to transport his forces, finally he contacted Basilia Mung. Experiments and allies. In addition to military forces, Athocles Van Roth wanted to acquire the resources he needed to facilitate the experimentation he planned to conduct on Valoria. The power of Bad Crasher had faded fully from the Crown by the time the expedition was planned, and Van Roth believed that it might initially take a living Orc to operate it. Teams of acolytes and elite troops he had summoned to his cause went to capture living greenskins in a series of daring missions. He also needed human test subjects, for which he took his pick from the convicts of the penal world of Vice. Basilia Mung was great-granddaughter to Eleusis of the same name, a relative expert in the Eldari language. Mung was just one member of a large family of xeno-savants, explorers, xenolinguists, and adventurers who worked for numerous inquisitors, as well as with many rogue traders. She was extremely wealthy and had an army of acolytes, mercenaries, and Xenos experts. Daring and ruthless, Mung was willing to undertake almost any action to succeed. She possessed the confidence of someone born to riches, as well as someone who had seen much of the galaxy's horrors. Van Roth called upon Mung for both her knowledge of the Eldari and her military capability, knowing that she would not be able to resist the chance to go to an Eldari maiden world. The Valoria experiment. Van Roth's allies and armies gathered, making for the maiden world of Valoria in all haste. They endeavored to avoid inhabited systems and spend as little time in real space as possible before reaching the Octarius belt. The journey was arduous, the shadow and the warp putting immense strain on their navigators, but their fleet arrived intact. Orbital scans showed Orcs were fighting Tyranids in locations all over Valoria. Van Roth was pleased, as this provided plenty of opportunities to test the Orc technology. After much discussion with Watch Captain Glycus and the Xenosavant Mung, they agreed a location to make their base of operations. They occupied an abandoned Orc fortress that was situated in a plain surrounded by mountain ranges, with only a single major pass in and out, and enhanced it with additional prefabricated defences. It was also close to known Orc and Tyranid locations and a crashed Eldari haven spire, a place of great interest to Mung. Van Roth began field testing as soon as he landed. He deployed units on missions to capture live Tyranids, assessing the Xenos' behavior when in the presence of the Orc technology. He conducted a multitude of experiments with the Crown on numerous test subjects, and had his xenologists attempt to develop prototypes. Despite countless failures and mounting casualties, nothing worked. The original Crown was the only device that had any impact on the Tyranids, and only then if worn by mechs. After several weeks of exasperating failures, Van Roff received a message from his fleet. Orc ships and space hulks were arriving in huge numbers. Many of these were on course to lumber into geostationary orbit over Van Roff's position, and were arriving at too fast a pace to evacuate all of the Imperial forces. An army that had cost Van Roff considerable time and effort to collect, and that he was loath to abandon. The news caused uproar. Mung's teams had barely finished surveying the outside of the crashed Haven Spire, and Glycus was concerned by this point that he and his warriors had risked being tainted by Xenos technology for no gain. With Van Roff and his allies requiring hasty withdrawal to avoid their total destruction, in the Watch Captain's eyes there was very little hope of redemption. Van Roff's fleet was keeping its distance from the Orcs for the time being, with the Greenskins growing closer to Valoria all the time. The window of opportunity in which they could feasibly risk extraction was diminishing rapidly. If Van Roff and his allies wanted to withdraw successfully, they needed to move to a new position, so their ships could reach them without being destroyed by the rapidly incoming Orc armadas.
Cart takes a quarter?
It's a rental. All he does pay for cart wranglers.
At the Council of War, the arguments raged. How had the Orcs found them? Why had they come? What should be done? Van Roff barely listened. He was engaged in his own internal debate, which led him to one inevitable conclusion. Silencing his comrades, he announced that the Orcs must have been drawn here by the energies of the Crown, and that desperate measures were required if the Imperial army was to escape alive with its prize. The Inquisitor explained his plan. With the Crown, elements of the Death Watch would infiltrate an area the other side of the large mountain range, among whose foothills they had deployed, where there were a significant number of Tyranids. Their aim was to lure the invading Orcs into the Tyranids' midst, and, in so doing, trigger conflict between the two. Once this had begun, the Death Watch were to withdraw back to Imperial positions. With the Orcs occupied, Van Roff hoped they would not be able to follow the Crown, even if they tried. Meanwhile, to help cover the overall Imperial retreat off Valoria, Van Roff and others would enter the ruined Haven Spire and destroy it. The detonation would close the mountain pass, slow any greenskin pursuit of the Death Watch, and prevent any overspill from the Tyranid and Orc battle. Mung and Glycus both expressed their deep concerns, understandably. The plan was extremely risky, and could fail in countless ways. They posited that abandoning the Crown altogether was an option for them at this point. Van Roff listened patiently. He acknowledged their views, but disagreed, stressing the value in being able to defeat the Tyranids. It would relieve pressure on the Death Watch, preserve the Imperium, and mean that fewer Xeno-relic sites would be consumed. The Inquisitor silently thanked the Emperor when his two allies agreed to follow him. Close to the point of initiation for Van Roff's plan, the Inquisitor received word from the Cadians guarding his force's dropships. One of their security patrols had found someone attempting to steal a transport. She claimed to be an Inquisitor, Avon Muir. Van Roff met with her immediately. She was bedraggled, thin, and visibly on edge. He asked how she had survived and what she knew of the Xenos, explaining to her that any information she might have could be vital for the success of his plan. Muir cackled when she heard it, dismissing it as a folly no better than that of Krickmans or Sahunsun. Van Roff stressed that no matter her opinion, the plan was underway, and if she wanted to leave Valoria, she would work with him, or she would be left to die. Muir told Van Roth why his plan to destroy the Havenspire could not work. Only the Eldari could operate its systems or hope to navigate its corridors in a short time frame. She explained that some Eldari still lived on Valoria, left behind after earlier conflict, and if Van Roth wanted to succeed, he needed their help. Muir said she could make arrangements in exchange for safe passage off Valoria, and Van Roth agreed. Muir was successful. At the base of the Havenspire wreckage, Van Roth, along with Mung, met with Autarch Belenidil and Warlock Antithras of Craftworld Beltan, Farseer Yeltiok of Craftworld Samhan, and Corsair Prince Landathai of the Dragon Dancers Warband. In exchange for their help, the Eldari insisted on being given safe passage off-world to a location of their choosing. Only when Corsair Prince Landathai explained that the Havenspire's systems required a user with an Eldari's innate psychic ability, and detailed the complexity of its network of internal passageways, did Van Roth reluctantly agree to the terms. "What the Inquisitor proposes will taint us all," said Sergeant Garland, in the hold of the Death Watch Command Corvus Xenos Bane. The shadow cast by the Death Watch and the dim light made his stony features appear ever starker than normal. "And any hope of success is slim at best," said Sergeant Ledian. "We have already risked enough working with that infernal crown," spat Chaplain Garatoy. "To work with Eldari is unthinkable." Van Roth's flagrant use of xenotechnology angered the chaplain more than it did even others of the Death Watch. "We might win the power to undo the entire Tyranid race," said Tech Marine Zolaris. "I would gladly sacrifice myself for such an end. It is a small price for the reward." "Careful. A heretic's path to damnation begins with such ideas," warned the chaplain. "Brothers, I hear you all," said Watch Captain Glycus. The choice Glycus had to make was no easy one. Van Roth had put himself and his warriors in a difficult position. To fight alongside the Eldari was a sickening thought. Yet the opportunity to undo the entire Tyranid threat was worth much sacrifice. "What say you, Hathabor, Leonicus?" he asked his librarians. Glycus was from a chapter of the Blood, the Cura Blades. Most scions of Sanguinius held the advice of librarians in high esteem. He was no different, so he listened to their words carefully. "There is no easy path, Watch Captain," said Leonicus. "Though I admit to understand what lies before us, the way is clouded. All I know is to expect great hardship. If we do not follow Van Roth in this, we risk losing the crown," said Hathabar. "I will not see it in Orcans, even if it is impossible for us to use it ourselves. We also need to keep watch over Van Roth himself. His behavior is disturbing." "Agreed," said Glycus. "We continue to work with the Inquisitor. For now." And so an alliance of Imperial forces and Eldari warriors entered the wrecked Havenspire. The alliance split into 3 groups, in the hopes that at least one would reach the Central Command Bridge to initiate the self-destruct. Watch Captain Glycus and Corsair Prince Lindathai led one group. Mung and Farseer Yeltiok led another, and the third was led by Van Roth, Autarch Belanidil, and Warlock Antithras. Each group was accompanied by Death Watch warriors and some of Van Roth's agents. The last reports Van Roth received before going inside were that the first Orc vessels were arriving and thundering through the atmosphere, altering their trajectories to hurtle down upon the Tyranid-infested zone on the other side of the mountain range. The plan appeared to be working. What no one knew was that a large number of the greenskins already on Valoria were also following the strange spoor left by the Crown, many of them on a course that would take them straight through the Imperial base. As Van Roth's forces and the Eldari explored the Havenspire, They moved slowly. Lighting was poor, and every few steps warriors felt the crunch of splintered bone beneath their boots. Dead Eldari, greenskins, and gene-stealers were in every corridor. Mung's group even found the body of a fallen space marine of the Deathstrike chapter. The stale air smelled of decay, and parts of the graceful Eldar architecture were defaced with crude orc glyphs. The threat of ambush was ever present, but in the first hour of exploration there was no sign of any enemy. Despite the risk of being followed, Van Roth permitted the placing of route trackers as they advanced, to make it easier to find their way out of the labyrinthine station. Communications between the free teams was patchy. It took no effort, however, to understand the screams when they came from the Vox, from Mung's group. Van Roth anxiously demanded a situation report from them, but none came. There was no way Van Roth's group could reach Mung from their position to aid her, so they had no choice but to continue with the mission. Van Roth ordered them to move more quickly, and then his group lost contact with their rearguard. Troops sent to investigate found nothing but gore-splattered walls, shredded uniforms, and rent weaponry. Within minutes of this discovery, pandemonium broke out. Eldari corsairs, Tempestus scions, and inquisitorial agents were all ripped limb from limb by purple-armoured gene-stealers. They moved with horrifying speed, bursting from torn-open vents and maintenance corridors. The veteran human and Eldari troops attempted to regain as much order as possible, shielding their leaders while trying to get into formation. Shuriken and hotshot lasfire cut down a number of the gene-stealers, leaving shredded and burned-through corpses, but the four-armed aliens continued to attack, surging from their hiding points. It was only thanks to the intervention of the Death Watch that the entire group wasn't overwhelmed in the panic and confusion caused by the sudden assault. The post-human warriors carved gene-stealers apart with broad chainsword sweeps, blew out their brains with bursts of bolter-fire, or engulfed them in deluges of burning promethium. The Death Watch's efforts brought essential respite to the group, whom Van Roth urged on, but were continuously harried by the Xenos. One by one, Imperial and Eldari warriors were cut down, no matter how many gene-stealers were killed in desperate rearguard actions or counterattacks. Still, Van Roth refused to consider retreat. They had come too far. The Death Watch trusted, with the Crown, successfully crossed the mountain range with limited opposition and set up a base camp at the foot, ready to withdraw as soon as the Xenos were fully established in battle. They watched as Orc dropcraft hammered into the landscape. Thousands of boys piled out alongside columns of pollution-belching armoured vehicles and buggies painted bright red. Within minutes, feral Tyranids attacked them in droves, working off their base instincts. The fighting became a total charnel house, as more greenskins landed and got stuck in, and the swarms of Tyranids smelled blood and raced into the fray. More and more of the Xenos were streaming in with no end in sight, and Librarian Hethabar, who commanded the Death Watch, was satisfied that the greenskins and Tyranids were totally occupied. He ordered his warriors to withdraw. This was no easy task, as the Tyranids living in the mountains were streaming towards the growing conflict. The Death Watch literally fought an uphill battle against increasing numbers of Xenos as they sought to escape. They even encountered orcs. Greenskins who had landed in the mountains were following the Crown's trail. The Death Watch kept moving, but one by one, Hethabar's warriors were cut down, impaled on scything talons, pummeled by mobs of boys or blown apart by rockets. Only Hethabar himself made it to the other side of the mountain, crown in hand. What he saw when he arrived nearly shattered his soul. There was no way they could escape this world now. After many running battles along the Haven Spire's passageways, finally Van Roth's group of exhausted and wounded survivors reached the crashed vessel's bridge. The Autarch had been slain, isolated trying to save a wounded comrade and hacked to pieces. Many of the Death Watch had also fallen. Sergeant Pythasus was the only one who still lived, albeit having lost an arm. The command center's control panels seemed to have grown out of the floor. as opposed to having been installed or placed there. Many had been snapped off and shattered, either by the crash or fighting. Eldari corpses were strewn everywhere. Some had been hacked apart. Others were sprawled over Eldari machinery. There were human corpses too.
I am the center of the universe. The only emperor of the galaxy.
Stupid.
One was that of Mung, her throat having been ripped out and her torso had been punctured several times by massive claws. There was no sign of Glycus, and they had heard nothing from his group. Van Roth ordered the Warlock to initiate the Haven Spire's self-destruct. It took the Eldari Psyker over half an hour, in which time Van Roth's battered troops had to hold off several more Genestealer attacks, costing even more lives. Though the self-destruct had been initiated, it was clear that to leave by the route they arrived was a suicidal path. Van Roth's group needed another way out, one requiring as little journey through the Haven Spire as possible. Van Roth decided they would blast their way out, using melter charges to melt through the hull at a weak point and escape that way. The Warlock set the self-destruct sequence with enough time for them to escape. Standing in the breach made by the melter charges, Van Roth looked out. When his eyes grew used to the light, battle was all he could see in all directions. Smoke filled the air from burning battle tanks and vehicle exhaust. Van Roth's troops were surrounded by hordes of orcs. Explosions ripped amongst the incalculably vast tide of greenskins as mortar and earthshaker shells detonated within their ranks. Van Roth watched as a Valkyrie, engulfed in flames, plunged out of the sky. It crashed into a defensive tower, no doubt occupied by Imperial infantry. The whole structure exploded and collapsed. "It cannot be," said Van Roth, completely stunned, his army being destroyed. He made out the wrecks of scores of Leman Russ battle tanks. He saw the dead piled up outside the field hospital. He watched as a group of Tempestus Scions raced to plug a breach in the Imperial lines within their Taurox armored carriers. "This is Sergeant Phaeaces. Brothers, do you hear me?" The sight of the Death Watch warrior, calling vainly into the Vox for his battle brothers, shook Van Roth. He activated his own Vox and his Locatorum beacon. "This is Inquisitor Van Roth. Demand extraction. Send Valkyrie immediately." There was no response. "This is Inquisitor Van Roth. Report." After several seconds, the Vox crackled into life. "My lord, all committed. Greenskins, so many," the Vox operator said. "I don't care how many there are. You will send a Valkyrie to us immediately." The only reply was static. "There is no word from my battle brothers," said Phaeaces. "So it is lost," thought the Inquisitor. "We have failed. All of us." A bright flash made Van Roth look to the sky. It was a burning Imperial cruiser, heading straight for the ground. He sank to the floor. All there was left to do was wait for the blast of the Haven Spire's self-destruct to consume him. Damor. Vodar Bloodprince, World Eater's champion of the Skull Hunt warband, ascended to demonhood, slaughtering orcs in the Octaria system. The Octarian War for him was a paradise, where bloodshed was endless and skulls could be piled as high as planetary atmospheres. Such was the Blood Price's power. He subjected many Khorne worshippers to his will, or otherwise drew them to him. Many had been left behind in the Octaria system after the Blood Crusade of Khorne ended. The blood-blessed Bloody Dawn, Gorefists, and Harvest warbands of heretic Astartes were among them. Besides these were vast hordes of blood-crazed cultists and beastmen warherds, Khorne-devoted, near-insane members of the Dark Mechanicum priesthood, masters of blending the empiric with the machine, and iconoclast and infernal knight households, with numerous dreadblades alongside them. To all these forces, the blood price promised a battle greater than any they had ever experienced. In a war zone as apocalyptic as the Octarian Empire, he had no doubt he would deliver upon his vow. What he found was a world known to the Orcs as Damor, because of the sheer number of armies consumed by the war there. Horde after horde of Orcs and Tyranids threw themselves into the planet's battles, and the death tally was beyond count. As the months and years of fighting had worn on, both Xenos races had poured only more and more resources into it. Now, whole broods of Biotitans fought tooth and claw with big mobs of Gargants. The world's oceans were a dark crimson, such was the volume of blood and ichor flowing into them, and land masses and forests had been reduced to little more than mud lakes. To Blood Price and his vast army of followers, it was a paradise within paradise, a blessing from Khorne. Here, the blood always flowed. Blood Price wasted no time, and conceived no great battle plan. He always held his flagship Gore-drenched at the fore of his fleet, and when his armada entered the planet's orbit, Gore-drenched charged through the clouds of dismembered Tyranid void forms and Orc ships' wreckage, and into the fray. Gunships poured from the Crimson vessel's hull, descending to the surface as the ship fired broadside after broadside into the swarms of Xenos, fighting in Damor's space. The rest of Blood Price's forces followed. They neither needed nor expected a word of command. There was only one course of action to be taken, and only one objective: slaughter. My Lord Critman, in addition to forces drawn from all wings of the Imperium's military operating in the Cordon, the following gives some more detail on the various Astartes forces that have been operating there in various conflicts. In addition to the large contingents of Death Watch Space Marines operating in the area, our agents have found mutually corroborating evidence of the presence of Dark Angels, Knights of Abhorrence, Silver Templars, Celestial Guards, Skull Bearers, White Panthers, Crimson Raptors, Deathstrike, Firelords, Wolf Spear, Fire Breathers, Rift Cobras, Dark Spires, Forlorn Sons, Rampagers, and Ultramarines, using the term Tyrannic War Veterans. Due to the Adeptus Astartes' total operational autonomy, some Space Marine forces operated for what appears to be little more than a few local days, others many local months. It is quite possible some performed missions and left before our agents learned of their presence. In addition to the above, there are unsubstantiated claims of the presence of the White Scars, Stormlords, Red Scorpions, and Raptors chapters. Some of the Space Marine forces have been identified as being little more than squad-sized, others much larger. Obsidian Jaguars, Adeptus Astartes chapter. An Ultramarine successor chapter, the Obsidian Jaguars' homeworld of Sebal, was recently conquered by Orcs of the Goths clan, their fortress monastery destroyed by Space Wolf forces seeking to deny resources to the Xenos. Given the extent of the chapter's activities, much of its fleet and most of its battle brothers were off Sebal at the time of the Orc invasion. Once the news of the planet's fall reached Chapter Master Aloak Zotzin, who was campaigning elsewhere, he rallied what remained of the Obsidian Jaguar's strength. As a result, Zotzin was able to gather a sizable force, though some elements of the chapter were too far away from the gathering point or too embroiled by war to respond to his request. Before the call for aid from Pancalis reached him, Zotzin's goal had been to reclaim Sebal from the Orcs that remained there and rebuild. Agent 14J, within the ranks of the chapter's Naval Officer Corps, informs us that it was only after much deliberation that Zotzin decided to divert his forces to Penkalis. On one level, a duty won out. The Emperor's worlds were under furious attack and the fate of others hung in the balance. On another level, it was an earlier opportunity than expected for revenge against the Greenskins. Any Greenskins. and for the chapter to hone its skills against their now most hated enemy. The Obsidian Jaguars fought in the Semithis, Karnak, and Kussost systems. In Semithis, many of their actions were punitive strikes with little particular strategic value, designed purely to inflict significant losses on the Orcs. Though the Karnak system was eventually declared lost to the Greenskins, the Obsidian Jaguars fought many battles alongside the Knights of House Xiphos and the Adeptus Mechanicus forces of Ryza and Karnak Free. They earned much respect from their allies for their bravery, and it is reasonable to conclude that no fewer than 6 Gargant kills can be attributed to their actions. Much of the Obsidian Jaguar's strength was committed to Kussost, with its quarries, industrial output, military strength, and food production capabilities. It was a linchpin system, one whose loss could have great impact on many other nearby systems. Here the Obsidian Jaguars were tireless. They crushed greenskin guerrillas on Fundil that had outmaneuvered and slaughtered Astra Militarum forces in droves, and successfully destroyed several invasion rocks that had landed in Ernwald's Henzi Desert. In a masterful display of void warfare, Captain Amquin Kutl led the ships under his command in a number of devastating hit-and-run attacks against the Greenskins' ramshackle armada. This brought precious time for squadrons from Lord Admiral Janzig Danathios' fleet to stabilize the combat situation above Kasselst Prime. We believe this action made eventual Imperial victory much more likely once void supremacy was achieved. The enemy on the ground were denied reinforcements and supplies. The Atalantian Spears, Adeptus Astartes chapter. The Atalantian Spears are a successor chapter of the Blood Angels, but appear to have little engagement with other chapters of the Blood. They were one of the scant few successors who sent no aid at all to Commander Dante after he summoned the Blood Angels' successors to defend Baal in the face of High Fleet Leviathan's invasion. The Atalantian Spears' actions have proven difficult to track or to predict, even for a dozen of our agents, despite them committing significant strength to the fighting in the Pancalis subsector. What is also unusual is that their forces operate in 2 distinct blocks that, so far as our astropathic intercepts can tell, had no communication whatsoever with each other. Their missions appear to have had little to no overlap, and they seem to have felt no need to appraise each other's actions, successes or failures. Their precise motivations for deployment in this particular war zone are largely indeterminable, as they communicated little with other Imperial forces. Given their propensity in the Pancalis subsector to target Orcs, Heretics, and Drukhari just as much as Tyranids, it seems unlikely that some act of repentance for failing to aid Baal in its darkest hours is part of it. To them, the Tyranids are just another enemy, one no more or less important to defeat than any other. We undoubtedly have not catalogued all the Atalantian Spear's actions, given the ever-present challenges provided by the Cicatrix Maledictum, the shadow in the warp, and the power of local so-called Wa energy. We've made some observations, however. On Gaidisk Alpha, a strike force of Atalantian Spears was deployed in the perfect place to ambush a Drukhari raiding party as it emerged from the webway. The Space Marines completely wiped out the Aldari with virtually 0 casualties as far as we are aware. It remains a mystery as to how they were able to predict such an exact location, though it may be related in some way to what appears to be significant reliance upon their librarians. Despite the precision of this action, however, we know that one ambush they set against Tyranid forces was fouled in a sudden attack by numerous Lictor genus creatures, and the Space Marines were forced to withdraw with significant losses. Elsewhere, we can say with reasonable degrees of certainty that Atalantian Spears warriors board in an Orc battlecruiser, referred to as a Megadaka Blaster, en route to the Karnak system, and set it on a collision course with a number of other Orc vessels. Such was the devastation caused, we believe that this act reduced the intensity of Orc attacks on Karnak Free by several months, in which time the world's tech magi successfully evacuated many precious technologies and irreplaceable weapon systems. The following are more brief recountings of the various Space Marine chapters involved in the conflict. Dark Angels. Dark Angels' forces were positively identified on the feudal world of Nobatia, the hive world of Capthan in the Zizor system, putting down the heretical cult known as the Eight Spokes and the Chosen of Arkabad. They prevented several areas of Capthan's orbital shipyards from falling into enemy hands and stormed the rogue vessel by his name Do We Live before it could leave the system. Current activities are unknown. The Silver Templars. Just one of many noteworthy actions of the Silver Templars in the Anilani system was on Ahelmil, in the defense of the shrine of Saint Bernard the Traveller. We believe hordes of heretics wished to seize the martyred saint's remains for use in some kind of ritual, and the Silver Templars held them off, throwing back waves of the traitors and culling many thousands of them while sustaining few losses. Knights of Abhorrence.
This is a song about a sleepy monster.
Though reports exist of the Knights of Abhorrence having also fought elsewhere in the region, primary intelligence speaks of their efforts in the Kussolst system. On Darkmont, they successfully destroyed a gene-stealer cult outbreak that called itself the Onyx Worms, in an area of highlands known as the Ribs of Jagathar. On Kussolst Prime, they were instrumental in the defense of the Broad Crest Citadel, where they launched numerous armored counter-thrusts against attacking greenskins. Wolf's Spear. The Wolf's Spear waged great hunts against the Tyranids on the frozen death world of Death of Byanzir. They stalked lictors in howling snowstorms and brought down biotitans on city-sized ice flows. On Mount Hilmbach, the Wolf's Spear initiated an avalanche that wiped out a colossal Tyranid horde, either crushing the Xenos or driving them into the icy depths of the Mirror Sea. Death Strike. The Death Strike fought to defend the emergency extraction of Gaidisk Quartaris' colossal food stockpiles. The world was beyond saving, but its resources were vital for the war effort elsewhere, though some of it the Space Marines were forced to burn to prevent the Tyranids from consuming it. The Death Strike themselves utilized Gaidisk's Tertius as a recruiting world, and so raced to rescue the small gene seed stocks housed there, as well as evacuate potential recruits. White Panthers. The White Panthers fought one of Unix's most important battles. First, they retook Vapor Extractorum Plant Alpha Megaris 001 from gene-stealer cultists of the ever-shifting Sand Coil. It was a close-quarters battle, made more difficult by the fact that the infrastructure had to be protected to maintain water supplies to the population. This took several weeks. At the end, the Space Marines had scant hours to prepare a defense of the planet they had just captured against a swarm of incoming Tyranids. Rift Cobras. The Rift Cobras responded to panic calls for aid from the penal world of Karnak V. They found themselves not only fighting the looting hordes of Nabrot Stubfingers, but also the armed rioting inmates. They crushed both with ruthless efficiency. In what was called the Death Rain Massacre, they slaughtered thousands of convicts in a matter of minutes, and also prevented the Greenskins from looting the vast armament stockpiles at Bastille 7C3. Rampagers. The Rampagers arrived in the Pancalis subsector shortly before Anilani was declared lost, deploying to the Zizor system. They have pursued heretical cults, wiping out several on Capthan, including the followers of the Hallowed Four and the Free. They have also fended off Drakari raiders on Dectalis. If these threats are contained, the system's defenders will be able to focus their efforts on Leviathan with much less distraction. Dark Spires. We almost failed to identify the Dark Spires in the Pancalis subsector. They made no contact with Imperial authorities and appear to have limited all their activities to the Semithis system. We have no evidence of their presence there before the system fell to the Orcs, and little idea as to what they were doing. Their presence does correlate, however, with a significant increase in infighting between orc war bosses, which saw many of the brutes killed. Celestial Guard. The Celestial Guard have only recently begun to rebuild their homeworld after it was attacked by orcs. It is without doubt the chapter harbour a deep hatred for these Xenos, committing significant strength to the fighting in the Semithis system. They cleared Beast Snagger warbands from the Morbal ravines on Nazca, and relieved the siege of Habidar Fastness on Keist, keeping its vital Logisticarum hub in use. Dark Krakens. The Dark Krakens earned a very good reputation amongst the populace of Bayanzir's Hollow for protecting civilians and settlements, just as much as actively pursuing the Tyranids. We understand that some citizens, and even troops of the Astra Militarum, who fought alongside them, tattooed themselves with the Dark Kraken's chapter symbol, or daubed it on their vehicles, weapons, or armour, for good luck. Imagine the smell. Firelords. The Firelords brought a considerable number of armoured assets to the Kussulst system, spending much of their campaign in Gratu. In the much-ravaged plains of Plenty, their storm speeders identified and tracked Tyranid swarms. Not only did this offer vital warning to other units, but it also provided targeting telemetry to the Firelord's own Whirlwind batteries, as well as Astra Militarum artillery, enabling these forces to annihilate huge numbers of Tyranids. Classified Document 800123-Z. Account of Orc forces engaged in Pancalis and on Valoria. My Lord Cripman, the Greenskins fighting in the Pancalis subsector and on Valoria came from a vast number of tribes. They brought with them all manner of war gear, including many weapons and vehicles previously unknown to our study. Below is a summary of my assessment. Greater detail is included in attached file 8B9GNS. Your loyal servant, JBZ. The Pancalis subsector. Each of the primary Orc warlords fighting in the Pancalis subsector had hundreds of tribes and warbands at their core. Kagrit, the Red Toop's hosts, included warbands such as Gorguts's Great Big Grand Mob, the Scrap Heap Bad Lads, and the Tank Smashers. The Scar Boys of Stugbrog the Face Grinder were among the largest our agents have ever recorded, almost comparable to the Greenskins described in the Apocrypha of the War of the Beasts, which I still do not believe is true, or actually happened. Nabrot Stubfingers was a relentless kleptomaniac. His personal vehicle was a looted Baneblade super heavy tank, taken during an earlier attack against Karnak Free, known as Gork's Other Foot. Stubfingers has since claimed many other similarly powerful vehicles for his own, each of which he, imaginatively, also named Gork's Other Foot, due to Stubfingers and his followers' proclivities for looting. His mechs had enormous amounts of material with which to experiment. Reports speak of multiple tests with explosive results, but also many that were productive. It appears that some weapons devised were particularly effective against the Tyranids. Alas, names such as the Crumpwagon of Gork, the Biggest Boomstick, and Mork's Wind give us little idea as to how they worked in practice. Valoria. There was no overarching warlord leading the orcs who fought on Valoria, as the various tribes and hordes involved arrived independently, though many war bosses fought each other for dominance at different times and seized control of each other's forces. All appear to have been drawn by Van Roff's experiments with Bad Crasher's crown. Several stand out. The Bloodaxe Beast Snagger, known as the Squig Hunt, were led by beast boss Kugrutz the One-Tooth, and they controlled entire herds of gargantuan squigoffs. The snakebite speed freaks of war boss Zip Funda were known as the Steam Stormers, and their convoys consisted of thousands of steam-powered custom trucks and buggies. The Goth Scar Boys of war boss Krug, who appear to have had no clan name, just declared wherever they went that they were the biggest and the meanest. Their mega-gargants crushed entire forests on Valoria's surface. Others included Zag Bog's cannon crew, Boss Gargos's Deathspite Daka boys, and the lads of the Stomp. The preferred fighting techniques of these latter free warbands are self-explanatory. Account of Tyranid forces engaged in Pancalis and on Valoria. My Lord Critman. As one would expect, Tyranid numbers in the Pancalis subsector were beyond calculation. Swarm behavior was largely within previously observed norms. Example cases are highlighted below. The behavior on those on Valoria was different, however, given their period of isolation from the rest of the High Fleet. Greater detail is included in file 2P3TDS. High Fleet Leviathan deployed millions of bioforms in a matter of hours against Gratu via mass mycetic spore drop. Notably, the vast majority, above usual levels, of the Tyranid strength was made up of gaunt forms. We have pick recordings of swarms covering several hundred miles of terrain without a break. It is unclear why they were deployed in such a fashion. We have identified a number of new subvariants of these bioforms that fall even outside the Alphas, Bitaro, Gammis, and Capon strains we have categorized. Local defense forces daubed two of these, Triclaws and Cyclopeans. Our Magi biologist allies have examined weapon samples taken from Gratu's battlefields, finding that the flesh borer beetles and devourer fleshworms are marginally different from those we retrieve from other war zones. Like all others, however, the teeth and body shape of these insectoids are finely adapted. These variations help them penetrate different patterns of flak armor worn by Imperial troops in the various regions being fought over. The fortress world of Vand was faced with both an attack from above in a mycetic spore drop and from below by preceded infiltration-optimized bioforms. What is particularly noteworthy is how fully prepared for siege warfare invading Tyranids seem to be. The preponderance of synapse creatures suggests an anticipation of high casualties and/or a need for closer than normal levels of force control. Additionally, I have seen very few battlefields where the Tyranids have deployed such a concentration of apex-level biotitans. A number of new varieties have been identified, named as Monstrum gravatamis and Bestialio galati. Bestiagladio gigantus, and Rhinocia arabdabus. Rhinocio Aribidus. The night world of Saubus was subjected to several weeks of severe spore mine bombardment from Leviathan bioships in orbit before the Xenos began planetfall. The Tyranids used varieties never identified before. Bioelectric bombs shorted out the connections between nobles and their throne mechanicum. Spore drifters clogged air exchange shrine intakes on both night suits and those built into fortifications. Delve spikes pierced several meters of ferrocrete before exploding and sending razor-sharp shards of chitin in all directions, bringing down walls and slaughtering defenders. Excerpt from log 147TRN. We barely pulled Tylon and Anatra out of Guidis quarters in time. They had only just secured our contract when the Tyranids attacked. There'd been no reports of spores and only the barest hints of the shadow of the warp. But this close to the Octarian War, there would always be some of that. Lictors and gene stealers poured up from the caves and slaughtered the fungi tenders in droves. My people got on the last lift out, human screams filling their ears as it ascended. Falamer, rogue trader. Sigma Ulstari. When Inquisitor Sahansun formulated the Cordon Impenetra, he decided that any system within its boundaries would no longer be defended. The only exception was the Sigma Ulstari system, because the industrial output of its Forge World was too important to the defense of neighboring subsectors to be abandoned. The system was heavily reinforced and came under attack by both Tyranids and Orcs. Even before the inception of the Cordon, the Sigma Ulstari system was well defended. It had to be, for its proximity to the Octarian Empire made it vulnerable to Orc attacks and raids. Forge World, Sigma Ulstari, and Factory World, Nirvana, produced enormous quantities of weapons to equip their defense forces. Both also had immense populations, from which they raised their armies. And when Inquisitor Sahansun created the Cordon, Fabricator General Heinrich Flagostock of Forge World, Sigma Ulstari, improved upon these forces. The number of system defense monitors, each the size of an asteroid and fitted with enough heavy weaponry to match several Imperial battleships, was trebled. Flagostock forged thousands of macro blades worth of additional Skitarii, deploying troops across the system, and provided resources to each world for the building of fortresses. Sigma Ulstari was of immense importance to the Imperial war effort against the Octarian Empire. Its proximity to the territory fought over by the Orcs and Tyranids meant it could receive communications from human-held worlds there, which could not otherwise reach the wider Imperium due to the strength of the Shadow and the Warp. These messages, most often desperate pleas for aid from abandoned Imperial worlds, were vital sources of intelligence into where Leviathan or the Greenskins were striking next. Sigma Ulstari also provided a launch pad for deep sector destabilization raids, designed to prevent either Orcs or Tyranids gaining dominance over the other. Inquisitor Sahansun regarded Sigma Ulstari as indispensable, and spent considerable effort in ensuring that it was adequately reinforced. Thus, the system was strengthened with additional astropaths, Imperial Navy ships, Sisters of Battle, and Imperial Knights. Despite these preparations, Sigma Ulstari soon came under severe strain, not from Xenos attacks, but from the demands of Imperial worlds. The system's astropaths were overwhelmed by streams of distress calls, and refugees flooded into Sigma Ulstari in their hundreds of millions. The system's tech magi had little sympathy or care for these displaced people, only taking in Mechanicus forces, elite military units, and those millions who would serve as useful slave labor. They delegated all responsibility for the rest of the refugees to the system's planetary governors. Millions of terrified citizens were forced into hastily erected camps on the worlds of Nirvana, Abundantia, and Molus Axum, where they had to be tested for Xenos taint. Others were left on board overloaded ships in squalid conditions for months, as they waited to be processed, leading to deaths from malnutrition, exposure, and disease. Some even rioted, resulting in brutal crackdowns and hundreds of fatalities. Most, who were declared free of corruption, were forced to work in the factorums, mines, and quarries, or were conscripted into the planetary defense forces. Those who failed the tests were never heard from again, but there was no way of telling if every corrupted citizen was identified. The first of the inevitable Xenos invasions came to Sigma Ulstari long before the refugee situation could be stabilized. The attacks were heralded by fresh waves of fleeing Imperial vessels, which included anything from battle-scarred Navis Imperialis cruisers to ostentatious pleasure yachts of Imperial gentry. Long-range void augers in Sigma Ulstari's orbit soon detected incoming Tyranid fleets, including hundreds of bioships. Deuteria was an ocean world with a population that largely lived on floating townships, built around heavy water extraction rigs or hunting flotillas. Given the relative lack of landmass, Leviathan deployed great flocks of winged bioforms and megashoals of sea-borne predators. The defenders met them with anti-air emplacements, fields of barrage balloons, depth charges and sea mines. The Tyranids hunted local fauna to deny the defenders access to food and spawned creatures that could weave through minefields and gnaw at the enormous anchor stilts that held up the township's rigs. In turn, the people of Deuteria developed rapid repair techniques and early warning systems. The tendril of Leviathan was eventually defeated in an enormously risky operation as the majority of the hunting flotillas gathered in one location, drawing in an enormous percentage of the Tyranid force. The defenders then unleashed flights of gunships loaded with atomic depth charges to slaughter the Xenos. Though thousands of the ocean world's inhabitants were lost in ensuing dogfights with Tyranid air beasts, enough survived to inflict catastrophic losses on the seaborne monsters. The invading Tyranids also surged upon the forge world of Sigma Ulstari itself, the surface of which was mostly given over to kilometers-deep oceans of toxic waste. This worked to the defenders' favour, as it meant that there was little safe landing ground for an invading enemy. The Tyranid invasion began with the seeding of vanguard organisms, which swiftly identified the danger the oceans presented to myecetic spores. The gene-stealers and lictors spread warning scents around the ocean shores to prevent any invading Tyranids landing in the corrosive seas. With limited landmass, the defenders concentrated their strength. There were only so many locations suitable for landing large armies. Scutari hosts, Astra Militarum regiments, Titan formations from Legio Ferrocastrum, and knights of numerous houses met the vast swarms. War raged in the upper reaches of the planet's forge spires and on its rad-scorched plains. Basilicon Astra and Navis Imperialis ships fought ferociously to annihilate the Tyranid fleet. Such was Sigma Ulstari's military might that it broke the Xenos invaders, but suffered high casualties in the process. The production capacity of some forge spires were reduced to nil. Millions of Tyranids survived and were in need of purging. The Forge world had held, but it would not be the last time they had to do so. It was many months before the next invasion of Sigma Ulstari system. It was carried out by cunning Bloodaxe greenskins, pursuing fleeing refugees in the hopes that they would lead them to fresh worlds. The hordes of Zagrob the Butcher attacked the forested quarry world of Molus Saxum. There they fought the planet's heavily armed lumber syndicates and stone cartels. The orcs utilized their camouflage and infiltrating abilities with terrifying skill in the planet's forests, capturing many of the lumber syndicate's enormous logging land ships. The slaughter went on for months, with the defenders finally achieving victory by luring Zagrob to an enormous cliff rigged with explosives, detonating them and sending his looted landship crashing to the ground below. This caused disorder amongst the greenskin hordes, allowing Imperial forces respite enough to regain the initiative and retake swathes of lost ground. Sigma Ulstari was attacked twice by the greenskins. The first invasion was headed by the immense war boss, Gibkrug the Face Crumper, and came at the same time as Molus Axum was set upon. The second was only weeks later, when the war boss Ugul Ironboot heard of the scale of the fighting on the Forge world and wanted a piece of the action. As with the Tyranid invasions, the greenskins were forced to deploy on Sigma Ulstari's landmass, where the defenders had already pre-zeroed hundreds of thousands of artillery pieces, projected the likely routes an invading army may take, and deployed millions of troops and armoured vehicles accordingly. Despite these preparations, the defences had been weakened considerably by the recent Tyranid invasion, and millions of troops were deployed to purge Tyranid infestations that still lived all over the planet. In the apocalyptic warfare that ensued, Imperial and Mechanicus casualties were appalling. Entire forge spires were destroyed. The only respite the defenders enjoyed was when orc hordes were attacked by Tyranids, or orcs, following different war bosses, scrapped with each other. But these moments were relatively few and far between. Eventually, purely down to the sheer power of Sigma Olstari's forces, the Orcs were also defeated. But Fabricator General Phlegostok knew they could not withstand another attack. He saw no reason a fresh invasion would not occur, and so Sigma Olstari called for aid. Total strength remaining since initiation of Cordon Impenetra Protocol 54.314%. Total defense monitor availability since initiation of Cordon Impenetra Protocol 27.832%. Estimate number of Orcoids still present on the world of Sigma Olstari, unknown millions. Estimate number of Tyranids still present on the world of Sigma Olstari, unknown millions. System population increase as a result of incoming refugees and retreating military forces, 63.975%. Situation untenable. Estimate likelihood of victory over additional Xenos invasion, 19.398%. Demand reinforcement. Stunned at Sigma Olstari. The next invasion to strike the Sigma Olstari system was larger than any before, with thousands of bioships powering through the void toward them, all prayed for reinforcements. Without aid, the defenders were sure the Tyranids would overwhelm them. The defenders of Sigma Olstari cried tears of joy and sang praises to the Omnissiah and the Emperor when they saw mycetic spores plunging into their Forge World's toxic oceans. However, this moment of gratitude did not last long as swarms, millions strong, raced from the waves. The Tyranids had adapted to the horrifically corrosive chemicals in Sigma Olstari's seas. Fixed artillery could not be relocated in time, and formations of Sigma Olstari troops were outflanked and destroyed before they had a chance to react. In a handful of places, Imperial forces managed to move quickly enough to prevent the Xenos from gaining a beachhead. Baron Kerlon of House Galerius led his knights in a heroic charge against the Tyranids as they emerged on the shores near Forge Spire Thetis Secondos, buying valuable time for Skitarii macroclades to be mobilized. The commander of the 813th Aeronautica Imperialis Lightning Sting Division scrambled hers and many other bomber divisions without orders, saving Forge Spire Phion Primus from invasion. More and more Forge Spires came under attack as the Tyranids deployed millions of bioforms on Sigma Olstari's landmass, as well as the world's oceans. Xenos swam up the refuse tunnels to infiltrate the Forge Spire's lightly defended underbellies, slaughtering thousands as they went. And artillery biotitans blasted the immense structures with barrages of corrosive spores that ate through meters-thick adamantine armor. Hundreds of thousands of electro-priests and Skitarii went to their depths to halt tunneling organisms, throwing themselves down the immense maws of the Ordinatus-sized creatures in an attempt to slay them from within. The threat grew so great that many tech magi risked the evacuation to safer Forge Spires of key personnel and technological relics. Many transports were torn apart by pursuing Tyranids, their precious contents lost forever. Fabricator General Phlegostok's forces were under immense strain. Some Forge Spires had fallen, many were under siege, and all were increasingly isolated from each other. Losses were in the millions. The situation was critical. There was still no sign of reinforcements when the Fabricator General received word of an Orc invasion fleet entering the system. Unbeknownst to him, enormous warp storms, resembling waves of blood, had torn through swathes of the Octarian Empire. They brought with them empiric entities and millions of Gaul worshippers who slaughtered countless greenskins and Tyranids, altering the balance of power in numerous battles between the Xenos races. Having had his Tyranid quarry slain by such a warp wave, Warboss, Tusker Grob World Killer, now led his snakebite hordes down upon Sigma Olstari in search of new foes. World Killer's war took the Tyranids by surprise as much as it did the defenders of Sigma Olstari. Biofleets previously committed to the final annihilation of defending Imperial ships hurriedly broke off to intercept the Orc invasion armada. On the ground, Megaswarms abandoned sieges to counter hordes of greenskins. Some tech magi whispered their thanks to the Omnissiah as orcs and Tyranids ripped each other apart, but this reprieve was always temporary. Soon enough, the fighting spilled into the forge spires, triggering tripartite slaughter, even bloodier than what had come before. While Worldkiller unleashed his warbands all over Sigma Olstari, the warboss himself targeted Alpha Primaros, the capital forge spire and seat of Fabricator General Phlegostok's power. There were only 2 land routes to Alpha Primaros, which was situated at the centre of an isthmus. One was blocked entirely by the toppled remains of Forge Spire Alpha Tertius, which fell in an earlier invasion and was now garrisoned by millions of Phlegostok's troops. The other was guarded by a series of bastions and fortresses called the Cogwall. Disregarding complex attack strategies as unorky mucking about, Worldkiller sent enormous hordes to attack from both routes at once. If he could overwhelm the defenders of one causeway, then those guarding the other would find themselves caught between orcs in front and behind. The ruins of Alpha Tertius were only suited to infantry. The fighting was a confused nightmare amongst a hell of warped metal, and there was no front line of any description in the bloody confines. The wreckage itself was several kilometers high and a greater distance wide. The ferocious battles taking place all through the labyrinth of its mangled superstructure. Barbarous snakebite commandos hunted their foes through crawlways, while Sisters of Battle squads purged chamber after chamber with flame. Troops could be surrounded without even realizing it. Navigation was inordinately difficult, and fragile parts of the wreckage could collapse at any point. Though these were all problems for the Greenskins as much as for the Imperial forces, the Orcs' numbers, tenacity, and sheer enjoyment of violence saw them push through. The fighting at the Cogwall was going no better, with Greenskin forces also grinding over increasingly isolated fortifications in their push to Alpha Primaros. Even the Titans of Legio Ferricastrum and the Knights of House Sucurius were not powerful enough to stem the tide of steam gargants, beast snaggers, and squigoffs. Fabricator General Phlegostok could see the end coming. Virtually every forge spire that still stood was in battle for its very existence, and soon Alpha Primaris would be under siege. To him, defeat was the only logical result. No help had come, despite Inquisitor Sahunsun's guarantees. Phlegostok gave orders for the safeguarding of his Forge World's most sacred technologies, and readied doomsday weapons that had been sealed away for over 10,000 years. But hope.
In partnership with the Norris family, Raising Cane's is celebrating National Chicken Finger Day.
Was not yet lost. The warp churned at Sigma Olstari's Mandeville Point, and 3 vessels powered into real space. One was rogue trader Evier Falamor's Vengeance-class cruiser, The Riches He Bestows. Another was the Retribution-class battleship Faithbringer of High Admiral Hereka Ajon, the commander of Task Force 5, Battle Group Erasmus, Fleet Primus of the Indomitus Crusade. Both of these huge vessels were dwarfed by the flagship of the Black Templar Space Marines, Eternal Crusader, captained by High Marshal Helbrecht. We are here to exterminate them all, nothing less. Their existence is blasphemy. The Xenos have less right to live in this galaxy than an insect has to carry my Crozius Arcanum. This day we begin the righting of a monstrous wrong. It is mankind's duty to purge the Xenos wherever it is found, not to use it or manipulate it. So, my battle brothers, drive your blessed swords into alien flesh. Let fire your holy bolters, and scour these worlds with righteous flame. Your God Emperor commands it. High Chaplain Merrick Grimaldus of the Black Templars. Following in the wake of these 3 vessels was an enormous fleet. High Admiral Ajon led an armada of hundreds of warships and troop transports. Falamor's flotilla consisted of a huge variety of vessels, collected by the rogue traders' dynasty over millennia. Helbrecht's fleet included dozens of chapter vessels, and was also followed by scores more Imperial warships, pilgrim barges, planetary evacuation boats, and more. Many of these the Black Templars had rescued. Others had sought the Space Marines out for protection. The fleets broke up. Elements of Task Force 5 and several Black Templars warships moved to reinforce beleaguered worlds throughout the system. The rest raced to Sigma Ostari. The Imperial fleet, coming to the aid of the Forge World, formed a huge wedge, the commander's flagship at the point. They smashed through the anarchic battles between the warring Orcs and Tyranids, and rallied the scattered Imperial survivors. In a matter of hours, scores of Xenos ships were ripped apart, and Xenos craft, attempting to reach the surface, were destroyed before they could even breach Sigma Ostari's atmosphere. The wedge of Imperial void ships rapidly cleared a path for hundreds of troop landers and heavy transports, loaded with millions of soldiers, tanks, knights, and titans. They plunged through Sigma Ostari's stratosphere, running the gauntlet of Orc aircraft squadrons and megaflux of winged Tyranid bioforms that battled for dominance of the skies. Many of all sides were destroyed. Nonetheless, pathfinding drop troops and scores of Aeronautica Imperialis divisions fought hard to clear landing zones. Ships docked with forge spires on the verge of total collapse. Deploying troops and battle tanks drove straight into streets and upper processionals to prevent the towers from falling. Black Templars deployed wherever the fighting was thickest. They relieved defences on the brink of collapse and blunted alien assaults, slaughtering countless Xenos like avenging angels. By their mere presence, they restored morale to the despairing defenders. The Space Marines of the Rift Praetors and Axes of the Emperor carried out a rapid drop pod and gunship assault against the Orcs pouring into the ruins of Forge Spire Alpha Tertius. Their gunships strafed Xenos hordes, while the Adeptus Astartes ran rampant through the Greenskins' forces, preventing many Orcs from piling into the ruins. Lances of knights from House Darthos and Mondast moved to reinforce the battered defenders of the Cog War, rescuing surrounded forces and enabling the fighting retreat. The Orcs' numbers were too great for anything else. War boss Worldkiller would not be denied his prize, however. Attacking Alpha Primaris with fresh waves of steamwalkers, squigoffs, and hordes of boys, he stomped over any pockets of resistance remaining at the Cog War and surged on to the Forge Spire. Retreating Imperial forces sent word of weapons unlike anything they had ever seen, which they believed had the power to breach Alpha Primaris's armoured flanks. Worldkiller had 6 gigantic explosive-rigged battering rams. Each was pulled by a dozen Orchiosauruses, gargantuan squigoffs larger than Imperial commanders had ever seen. One of these monsters was Worldkiller's Mant, and the war boss had every intention of being the first Orc into Alpha Primaris. If the Forge Spire was to survive, the battering rams had to be stopped. When Helbrecht heard of what was transpiring, he rallied the bulk of his warriors and rushed to Alpha Primaris. The battle for Alpha Primaris rapidly became the most ferocious on the entire planet. Aeronautica Imperialis divisions fought desperately for aerial supremacy. Interceptors engaged in fierce duels with Orc fighters to make room for bombers to strike at the immense squigoffs. Each battering ram was escorted by hundreds of thousands of Orcs, and every kind of ramshackle vehicle, contraption, and walker in the Greenskin arsenal. The Orchiosauruses themselves had battle howdahs, filled to the brim with boys manning cannons and anti-air guns. Rampaging speed mobs intercepted Imperial armoured columns attempting to fight through to the Orchiosauruses. Battles within battles formed as Imperial forces made countless attempts to slaughter the squigoffs and stall the advance of the rams. All failed. Helbrecht looked upon it all with a deep sense of frustration. He prayed continuously as he appraised the tactical situation, looking for a weakness in the greenskin host and beseeching the Emperor for a fragment of his divine wisdom. The High Marshal's prayers were answered when he observed the Squigoth's huge howdahs were unshielded. They could be boarded. Attempting to attack them directly in such a way was hazardous in the extreme, but so was every worthy test of faith. Helbrecht gave his orders. The Black Templars were to board dropships, wipe out the orcs mounted on the Orchiosauruses, and slay the beasts before they could reach Alpha Primaris. Already the gargantuan creatures trampled closer to the forge spire with every passing minute. Helbrecht demanded escort cover from all those aircraft that could break off their dogfights to provide it. Phlogostock ordered flights of Archaeopters, loaded with Sigma Ostari Sicarians, to fight alongside the Space Marines. Together they soared through the world's polluted air, under constant attack from Orc aircraft squadrons and flak guns. Imperial fighters dived and banked all around them, battling with the greenskin aircraft. Despite the heroics of the Imperial pilots, Orc fire still got through. Storm Ravens and Archaeopters plummeted to the ground, fragmenting in the air before exploding on impact with the surface. Barely half of Helbrecht's hastily assembled forces reached their targets. Black Templars and Sicarians leapt out of still-moving dropships onto the fighting platforms. Some went to their deaths, butchered by the hulking greenskins the moment their feet struck the deck. Those that survived hacked and slashed at the orcs with righteous hatred. Helbrecht wanted World Killer's head, and his dropship stormed for the foremost Squigoth. The orc war boss's howdah was several stories tall and packed with the greenskins' biggest and meanest champions, warriors with clattering strings of beast fangs and vivid war paint. Helbrecht and the Sword Brethren, who joined him, tore into the Xenos, delivering murderous blows, whilst reciting battle cants and war hymnals. The orcs met them with bestial savagery, every one of the Xenos wanting the Space Marines' heads for their trophy racks. In the war platform's close confines, there was no space for the employment of clever tactics. It was a battle only of pure brute force and sheer will. The decking became slick with alien and post-human blood, and warriors trod on the corpses of the fallen. Amongst it all, Helbrecht was always moving, every swing and thrust of the sword of the High Marshals taking an orc limb or head. It was not long before Helbrecht came face to face with war boss World Killer. The greenskin was bedecked with glyphs depicting serpents and fangs, and he had festooned his armor with tusks and skulls taken from slain beasts. Helbrecht spat at the sight of such hideous blasphemy. He vowed to the Emperor that he would slay the Xenos. Anger coursed through him, fueling his muscles as food would an ordinary man. The greenskin countered every one of Helbrecht's attacks with an axe as tall as the High Marshal that crackled with energy. The sheer power behind the orc's blows jarred Helbrecht's arms with every parry. For all his fury, the Black Templar was tiring and could not break through the greenskin's defenses. Another strike from World Killer snapped the bones in one of the High Marshal's arms. The war boss punched him in the head, cracking his skull. Blood streamed down Helbrecht's face as he was forced down to one knee. As World Killer lifted his axe for the killing blow, Helbrecht raised duty's burden, his combi melter, in a last-ditch effort, firing a burst of bolter-fire. The rounds blew apart World Killer's knees, causing the orc to roar in pain and drop to the floor. Staggering to his knees, the High Marshal drove his sword through the beast's head. With the war boss slain,
University of Phoenix, your tuition rate is locked in from the day you enroll until you graduate, so you always know what to expect.
Stupid fuck.
the High Marshal looked around.
Hate commercials, dude.
His blooded warriors were butchering the remaining orcs on the howdah. Across the battlefield, he saw a number of enormous squigoths on the ground, rivers of blood pouring from enormous wounds in their heads and necks. The battering rams had stalled. Helbrecht's plan had succeeded. Classified document 464745L. Echoes of Octarius. My Lord Cryptman. Our Emissarius network and augury stations continue to provide us with information about the ongoing state of affairs in the Octarian region. See here a select handful of communications and recordings I deem to be of particular interest. More can be found in file 7H8E Echo Echo. Ever your most loyal servant, JBZ. Recording 1. Another astropath died today, the last one. The message is they received all speak of horror, death, and alien conquest. The missives are full of terror and desperation. So many worlds, so many are falling. We are truly alone out here. I've ordered the evacuation. We are doomed otherwise. Recording 2. This is Admiral Cornelius Baryal of the Talavaris Subsector Defense Fleet. Orcs are ravaging the Deus, Zelos, and Carino systems. They have a dozen space hulks, thousands of ships, and they've already destroyed half my vessels. They broke through most of the Defense Guardian stations in a matter of hours. I've pulled in every patrol, pressed every merchantman, and rushed 200 damaged or incomplete vessels to a kind of battle readiness. We make our stand at Gentari Anchorage. If the Orcs take it, the Emperor knows how many ships they will be able to build and repair. We will hold as long as we can. To any vessel that hears this, please aid us. Recording 3. Emperor, save us. The last Titan. It is fallen. Destroyed by a half-dozen of the green-skinned Gargants. Nothing stands between the citadel of St. Erenthion, the blind, and the hordes now. My bastion is full of the wounded, the sick, and the afraid. My troops are exhausted. My ammunition supplies depleted, and my walls weakened. If not even the god engines can throw back the Xenos tide, what chance have I? We stare defeat and death in the face. The Orcs will be upon us soon. We are the last holdout on the entire continent. I can only pray that aid comes soon. Recording 4. Enforcer wards 32 Sierra, 15 Delta, and 47 Epsilon have been overrun by the Xenos worshippers. The entirety of the 2nd and 97th Defense Militia Regiments are corrupted and have thrown in their lot with the heretics. And these are only the traitors we know of for certain. Several gate bastions guarding entry to the lower mid-hive are under siege. We've mobilized more militia regiments, but we're finding corrupted cells in all of them. Nonetheless, these are not my biggest concerns. The cultists are making their way to the Grand Armory at Kairas Junction. Only Enforcer Macro Ward 93 Philon is in their path. If they are defeated, the enemy will have access to hundreds of battle tanks and combat walkers. We must intervene. Recording 5. The Margus system has fallen, sire. All of it consumed by Leviathan. We encountered a handful of refugee ships that we will quarantine and hand over to the Adeptus Arbites when we return to the point. Scarcely a few 100,000 made it off their worlds. None of those we've identified were on the evacuation list, sir. It looks like the Tyranids got them all. Generals Rask, Helan, Bertius, and Reng are all gone, along with their armies. Governor Zakani won't be getting reinforcements. Recording 6. Emperor be praised, safe at last. Worth every owed favour and coin spent. I felt such relief when the dropships burst through the rogue trader's vessel. The burdens of planetary leadership are heavy indeed, heavier when doomed to alien invasion. My successor will have warning of the oncoming Tyranids. I have made sure of that. But I would never have been able to leave Actios if I had told anyone earlier. Recording 7. My lady, something in the Orc Empire of Arctorius has come to our attention. The Greenskins call it Damor. The blood worshippers, who we thought had disappeared from the region, still fight there. They are growing in strength, stirring up an escalating conflict between themselves, the Greenskins, and the Tyranids. They began fighting for a world and now fight for a system. We have identified numerous large-scale empiric manifestations. We should gather the Conclave and contact Titan. Recording 8. We had finally declared victory when they came. Our cities were burning. Billions of our population had been slain. Our forests were no more. Our oceans were polluted. We had been devastated, but we could rebuild. Then the tomb ships appeared in orbit, scores of them. Ancient buildings, thrumming with eldritch energy, arose out of our war-shattered ground at the same time. My lord readied us for our final stand. I too readied my weapons, but he sent me away to warn you. There are Necrons coming. They have claimed my world of Rose Shihad, and perhaps others. You could be next. Excerpt from log 273BHG. Pancalis was but the start. Whatever instigated that, I've heard theories ranging from the machinations of the Dark Gods to coinciding Xenos mating seasons, all cause further attacks. My contacts only hear fragments and rumours, most of the time, but the combined picture is growing clearer with each conversation they record. More planets are coming under threat. The few Imperial worlds left inside the cordon space are becoming scanter by the week. More of the destabilization raids are failing. More Space Marine chapters are involved. Sahun Sun is going to greater extremes to find reinforcements. The pot is boiling over. What is a simple merchant to do? Of course, I have ships and warriors I can deploy. It is a dangerous galaxy indeed, and I know its hazards better than most. On the other hand, there is much wealth to be gained here. Every world cries out for weapons, and countless millions seek passage to safety. Demand for holy relics has never been higher, and a war such as this provides endless martyrs to help meet that need. Yet there comes a point when more direct action in any situation must be taken, and that can yield lucrative opportunities of its own. Ivor Follamore, Rogue Trader.
Skyscanner searches billions of prices from all our favorite travel sites in one place.
Yesterday. Yesterday was amazing. Rachel was determined to live her life on her terms, not her migraines. Because after years of coping, Rachel took the next step to find an option that could work for her. Yesterday, breakthroughs were made and lives were changed. But that was yesterday. Let's outdo yesterday. Talk to a doctor about migraine treatment options.
Octarius. The Octarius system has been at the heart of the Orc and Tyranid War in the Octarius sector for years, since Inquisitor Cryptman lured a tendril of High Fleet Leviathan into Greenskin space. The death toll on both sides numbers in the trillions, and neither species will relent. The Swarmlord led the Tyranid invasion of the Octarius system. Billions of bioforms attacked planets at the Great Tyrant's direction, drowning them in a tsunami of fangs, claws, and chitin. In doing so, they rendered it impossible, or at least undesirable, for the Greenskins on one planet to reinforce another, because they had a huge war on their own turf to fight. By isolating them, each world would be easier to consume. The planet of Uruk fell in a matter of days. Urmuk, with its orbital junker ports and freebooter fleets, became the site of immensely destructive void battles. Entire greenskin vessels were consumed by ravenous void monsters and digested in a matter of hours. In return, orc ships fitted with immense rams bore down upon the Tyranid craft and tore them asunder. The countless big mechs of the Super Rock Gork's Bonts rolled out thousands of increasingly bizarre weapons against the swarming invaders. Entire broods were turned to dust by barrages of lightning or reduced to puddles of goo by weapons that altered local gravity fields. Much of the fighting on Urmuk and Gork's Bonts was done in narrow confines and choke points. The Greenskins knew their constructions well. Sneaky blood axes crawled beneath deck plates, slid along the service tunnels and squeezed into ventilation shafts to ambush the Tyranids that flooded Gork's Bonts. Editor's note: the term Bonts means head in an ancient regional dialect of Holy Terror, and more specifically, the part of the main island of Old Albia known historically as the North. Many Blood Axes conducted boarding operations of their own, infiltrating arterial passages of Tyranid bioships, severing Ichor vessels, planting demolition charges, and causing all kinds of mayhem. Many Tyranid ships broke off their attacks against the Orc holdings, writhing in agony and screeching into the void because of the Blood Axe's actions. The speed freaks of war boss Gurgruk de Spleen Ripper fought the Tyranids on the world of Dakazot. Subterranean swarms dug enormous caverns beneath the planet's plains, causing cave-ins when columns of greenskin vehicles tore over them. This only entertained the Orcs more, as their racetracks were suddenly filled with additional deadly obstacles. Wherever Tyranid swarms operated above ground, they were pounced on by the rampaging speed freaks. The greenskins roared with laughter when they squashed bioforms beneath their heavy tires and were sprayed with dark ichor. Badsquig was home to billions of orcs, many of whom were beast snaggers. The Great Hunter and war boss Gragnat's Stompkrumper ruled the planet with not only an iron fist, but a personal menagerie of thousands of squigosaurs. To these creatures, Stompkrumper fed his defeated rivals, along with any orc foolish enough to hunt beasts the warboss himself had marked as his personal quarry. When the Tyranids invaded, Stompkrumper praised Gork and Mork. Many of the beasts the swarms brought with them were bigger and meaner than anything the warboss had ever seen. He mobilized every orc on Badsquig for war, declaring the time of the big kill. He swiftly learned that Carnifexes could not be tamed in the same way as Squigosaurs, losing an arm, a leg, and an eye in his attempt, but such accidents were merely setbacks to Stompkrumper. Octaria was the capital world of the entire Octarian Empire, and the seat of power for the Overfiend of Octarius, an orc warlord of immense size, reputation, and power. On that world, billions of greenskins and Tyranids died within Octaria's mountainous settlements, and amongst the vast underscrapped cities beneath them. Stone valleys echoed with gunfire, roars of pain and slaughter for month after month without end. The ground was turned to a crimson mulch of blood and ichor. A constant stream of orcs and Tyranids arrived, each race seeking to gain supremacy in a relentless war of attrition. Such was the power of the Overfiend, and the sheer number of orcs that not even the dark genius of the Swarmlord was enough to overcome the greenskins. The Tyranids needed more biomass, so offshoots of the tendril went off in search of it. With the whole of the Octaria system still embroiled in war, they went to lesser orc-held worlds, known to the Imperium as Gorola, Keltor, and Daragon. There they slaughtered billions upon billions of greenskins and consumed enough biomass to conquer Octaria thrice over. However, before the hive ships, bulging with these extra resources, managed to arrive back on Octaria, the Great Rift tore itself across the galaxy. Few places were left unaffected by the appearance of the Great Rift, and the Octaria system found itself in the grips of what was known as the Blood Crusade by Imperial observers. Mighty hordes of gore-crazed corn worshippers and legions of bloodthirsty demons descended upon the system, riding roiling warp storms that some called blood waves. Octaria was engulfed in a new level of war. The Tyranids fought especially viciously to keep demonic hordes from destroying Octaria's plentiful biomass. Bloodletters swarmed over Biotitans and dragged them screeching to the ground to be hacked to death. Bloodthirsters beheaded hive tyrant after hive tyrant, and droves of blood-worshipping humans used their bare hands to tear at Hormagaunts in a violent frenzy. All roared Khorne's praises as they slew. After 8 hours of horrific slaughter, the blood waves receded, and the overwhelming bulk of the Khornate forces vanished with final echoing cries, as if they were never there. Both alien races had been seriously depleted by the conflict, but the Tyranids were left much weaker than the Greenskins. Demons offered them little sustenance, but had butchered countless millions of bioforms. The balance of power was now stacked against the Tyranids in favor of the Orcs. The bewildered survivors of both sides picked up the fighting where they had left off, with little time lost. The Overfiend observed his boys were winning more often, and that the Tyranids were fewer in number. The mighty Orc chieftain pressed his advantage, crushing swarm after swarm and gaining momentum. He was winning. The Swarm Lord knew, however, that the Overfiend was the Orc's linchpin. Without him, the Greenskins' cohesion would fall apart. Therefore, the Tyranids' only chance of turning the tide and securing the eventual consumption of Arctaria was to slay the Orc warlord. The Stormlord also recognized that if it left it too late to strike, the Tyranids could be driven from Arctaria, and the Overfiend would be free to take up his armies and sweep the rest of the system clear of bioforms. The Overfiend was not difficult for the Swarm Lord to find. The colossal Greenskin was always at the centre of the biggest battle. The Swarm Lord, accompanied by hundreds of Tyrant Guard, fought its way to the Orc warlord, while the Tyranids carved their way through Greenskins the size of Death Dreads. The Overfiend met their charge head-on with a delighted roar. Within the fray, the Swarm Lord and the Overfiend met, the former leaping with incredible speed to avoid the grasp of the Overfiend's immense power claws. Scores of Tyrant Guard sacrificed themselves to shield their charge, but time and again the Overfiend blocked their decapitating strikes with an ironclad arm. Neither leader could overcome their opponent. After hours, the Orc eventually got the better of the fight, landing a devastating punch into the Tyranid's midriff after crushing a Tyrant Guard who tried to stop him. He grabbed the Swarm Lord's head in a claw and crushed it. Seizing the monster's body with his other claw, the Overfiend ripped the beast in two. Such an event would break many armies, but not the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan. Other Synapse creatures swiftly gained control over the hordes as they made a fighting withdrawal. Though they were beaten this day, billions more of their kind fought on. The Hive Mind had not lost on Arctaria yet. Meanwhile, the swarms that had consumed Garola, Keltor, and Daragon were approaching the Arctaria system. Thousands upon thousands of bioships made up their number, and they had spawned billions of bioforms, with billions more on the way. On one hive ship, the largest in the entire tendril, a roaring creature emerged from a sack of amniotic fluids, its sharp talons slashing through the thick membrane with ease. The beast was the Swarm Lord. It wanted the Overfiend and Arctaria, and would not stop until every morsel of both had been subsumed into the Hive Fleet. The consumption of Arctarius. Though the Tyranids were at a disadvantage, and the warp storm that had brought the Blood Crusade had blown past, war still shook the Arctaria system. Leviathan's bioforms continued to infest void lanes, planets and moons. The ferocity of the conflict claimed countless lives an hour, and with an endless tide of bioships pouring into the system, the war's intensity increased 100-fold. The Swarm Lord's fresh tendril comprised immense shoals of enormous ships, and drove straight for the world of Arctaria. Subtendrils split from it, and coiled into the system, like some awful octopoid entity, enfolding the system in its inescapable grasp. They broke off to attack each of the system's other worlds, which had great supplies of biomass. The Swarm Lord's plan was to swiftly overwhelm and consume these planets so that the invasion of Arctaria would have a constant supply of reinforcing ships and bioforms. Additionally, such a strategy ensured that the Orcs on every other planet had neither means nor motivation to reinforce Greenskins elsewhere. The only exception to this was Orruk, which had already fallen. The ships dispatched there by the Swarm Lord rapidly sped up the consumption process of the planet so that its biomass could be used in the invasion of Arctaria. Orruk's surface was dotted with digestion pools, capillary towers, spore chimneys, and biofactory organisms. Drone ship haulers lifted tons of mass to feed bioships in orbit, which spawned hundreds more of their number. Orruk's climate had changed entirely, its weather patterns manipulated to encourage the rapid growth of single-celled digestion organisms. Within a matter of weeks, the world was a lifeless rock, every molecule of its oceans and atmosphere drained to feed the Hive Fleet. By the time the Swarm Lord's hordes reached Bad Squig, war boss Stompkrumper's big kill was losing momentum. Most of his pet Squigosaurs had perished. Many were slaughtered in battle, while others died after eating dead Tyranids. The tendril had adapted a toxic blood in the face of a foe that consumed the flesh of whatever it killed. At the outset of their first Tyranid invasion, Bad Squig's beast snaggers had put their hunting skills to good use, butchering scores of biotitans and thousands of other immense bioforms. However, the Hive Fleet adapted to them in turn. Synapse creatures and other prize bioforms were always surrounded by lesser creatures to protect them. Orc chieftains were getting fewer and fewer kills, fanning their resentment towards Stompkrumper. Some challenged his authority, hampering his efforts to fight the war.
Your rig is only level 10? What a trash. Your bike is mine.
No solar panels, even no turrets? Garbage!
Nonetheless, Stompkrumper was still a huge threat to the Tyranids, as wherever he and his followers went, ichor flowed in rivers. Stompkrumper's undoing was the spawning of a kind of biotitan he'd never seen before. It was a huge beast with fangs as tall as an orc and claws that could tear apart mega fortresses with ease. Most dazzlingly, it possessed piercing yellow eyes and bright, almost fluorescent blue skin, leading the greenskins to name it the Blue One. Stompkrumper wanted to kill it, finding its garish coloration irresistible, and soon his desire became an obsession. He planned trap after trap, and sacrificed thousands of greenskins as bait, all to no avail. On more than one occasion, he almost took his prize, but it was simply the hive mind luring him even further into his compulsion. The war boss's desperation grew to such an extent that he spent every waking moment in search of his quarry. He thus became easy for the Tyranids to manipulate, and eventually he and his army were led into an enormous trap. Stompkrumper found the Blue One at the center of a deep, dried lake bed, with a relatively small number of other bioforms. The war boss believed this was his chance. Without thought for strategy, Stompkrumper charged in with his forces. Once they were stuck in the fray, hordes of Tyranids surged in from all sides, surrounding the greenskins and wiping them all out. The Orcs had the upper hand in the fighting for Gork's bonds. Thousands of mechs invented new devices and weapons at a rate that matched the swarm's ability to adapt. Though the Tyranids had gained ground in the Super Rock's narrow tunnels, the Orcs responded by simply building more chambers and tunnels for themselves on the other side of the planetoid. This situation changed dramatically with the arrival of the Swarm Lord's reinforcements. There were enough bioships to surround Gork's bonds and seed it with tens of thousands of vanguard organisms there to lie in wait for a later invasion. Though hundreds were killed when found by greenskin machines designed to detect Tyranid infiltrators, many more successfully established hiding places. The Leviathan attack that followed came against Gork's bonds from all directions. Great masses of bioforms were sent into every nook and cranny of the enormous planetoid. The vanguard organisms set ambushes that hampered Orc retreats, sabotaged crude life support systems, rooted out Blood Axe infiltrators, and prevented the greenskins from expanding into newly constructed tunnel networks and scrap forts as they had before. The Orcs fought back viciously. Greenskin contraptions caused gravity to collapse or contort in tunnels, killing hundreds of warrior organisms swarming through them. Atmosphere was vented from dozens of miles of compartments, sending invaders out into the cold of the void. Some areas were booby-trapped with explosives or rigged with spike-lined walls that crushed all inside. Despite these devices and the enormous toll they inflicted on the Tyranids, the Orcs had nowhere to retreat to, and the tendrils' numbers were countless. The greenskins were surrounded and being systematically eradicated. Though initially many of war boss Gurgruk the Spleen Ripper's speed freaks were killed by tunneling Tyranids after Leviathan's invasion of Dakazot, the Greenskins soon adapted. They found that the tunnels dug by the invading aliens were excellent places to race in. There was impenetrable darkness, cave-ins, ambushing Tyranids, hazardous terrain, and even the risk of driving straight down the gullet of some enormous subterranean worm with an acid-filled stomach. The Orcs loved it. The fast-moving Greenskins were difficult for the Tyranids to pin down, so when the Swarm Lord's ships arrived, they deployed hundreds of waves of winged bioforms. These megaflocks unleashed nets of fire over swathes of territory the Orcs were racing through, making it impossible for the Greenskins to avoid being struck. The Tyranids wiped out vast numbers of Orcs below ground too. The sheer number of Greenskins in the tunnels caused countless crashes and a huge amount of infighting. The Orcs were trapped, and now more closely packed, making them perfect prey for the Tyranids. The Swarm Lord's fleets found the space battle around Urmok still raging. Orc factories churned out vessel after vessel, and had to be eradicated if the world was to fall. The bioships launched hundreds of thousands of lamprey-like void eels that clamped their enormous jaws to the flanks of the Junker shipyards. Burrowing deeper with their razor-sharp teeth, the creatures gnawed breaches into the scrap iron hulls. The void eels then vomited hundreds of bioforms that stormed the Orc factory craft and slaughtered the construction crews. With the Greenskins incapable of producing more ships, the Tyranids soon dominated Urmuk's orbit and invaded the planet. Its total digestion swiftly followed. The Swarm Lord first needed to control Octaria's orbit if it was to claim the planet. Hundreds of Greenskin ships arrived each day, loaded with Orcs itching to get into the fight. If Octaria was to be conquered, it had to be completely cut off from Orc reinforcements. Thousands of bioships moved to blockade the planet. To reach Octaria, Greenskin fleets had to smash their way through batteries of living pyroacid and bioplasma cannons, alongside a wall of chitin as tough as battleship armor. The prospect of a huge brawl in space was no less inviting to rampaging Orcs than a ground war, but the vicious void battle kept the Greenskins from reinforcing the Overfiend in significant numbers. Though the Swarm Lord wanted a swift victory, it did not behave hastily. Driven by the fearsome predatory intellect of the hive mind itself, it had learned from previous experience to be methodical and calculated. The creature wanted to dominate every sphere of the battlefield, and would do so step by careful step. First, its bioships had equalized the war in orbit, securing routes for vanguard organisms to deploy to the planet. These creatures wreaked havoc. They cut supply lines, ambushed Greenskins heading for the front lines, slaughtered Gretchen slaves working in weapons foundries, and opened multiple new fronts. All of this brought time for the Tyranids from the previous invasion. They regrouped and regained cohesion, following the punishing drive to victory the Overfiend had launched after it had killed the Swarm Lord many months before. The next stage of the Swarm Lord's invasion was taking control of the skies. Though the Overfiend's air armada held aerial superiority, soon these air forces found themselves fighting for their very survival. The light of Octarius' star was blocked by winged bioforms, ranging in size from gargoyles to creatures as large as small void ships that had enormous venom cannons protruding from their flanks. The skies of Octarius became a mass of destruction and slaughter, with charred corpses and savaged wrecks dropping to the surface by the thousand with each passing minute. With aerial dominance asserted and the ground situation stabilized, the Tyranids moved as one to clear landing zones for fresh swarms of bioforms. Bioships cleared safe routes to Octaria's atmosphere. Portions of the skies were rendered devoid of Orc craft, and vast areas of ground were cleared of lingering greenskin warbands. The mycetic spore drops began, with billions of Tyranid organisms ready to sweep Octaria clean of all resistance. Amongst them were thousands of biotitans and artillery organisms to crush the gigantic contraptions the Overfiend was fond of deploying, and to bring down the Greenskins' enormous fortresses. Still, the landing did not proceed smoothly, despite the Swarm Lord's efforts. The Overfiend controlled every aspect of his world. Almost all of the planet's landmass was heavily fortified. The Mechanics who followed the Overfiend had tinkered, experimented, and innovated in countless ways, which included turning entire mountain ranges into weapons. When mycetic spores clung to them like ticks on a beast of burden's back, they opened like enormous maws of hungry, bestial gods. Miles of rock parted to reveal rows of serrated teeth that gnashed and span violently. Millions of bioforms tumbled into their maws, and the jaws of metal and rock slammed shut, casting the Tyranids upon saw blades that reduced even the largest of them to gobbets of meat. The Overfiend. The Overfiend is the ruler of the Orc Empire of Octarius. It is a title rather than a name. Imperial observers have noted that numerous Orcs have claimed it for themselves when the former holder has been slain, or, as in the case of Gorsnik Magash, when he left to wage war on Armageddon, has left Octarius. To become the Overfiend, an Orc must possess incredible physical might and cunning. They must have the strength and size to kill perhaps dozens of rivals, all of whom are colossal warriors with slabs of battle-hardened muscle. A contender for the title must also have the brains to outwit them all, for few greenskins are completely above the use of ploys and tricks to bring about the undoing of an enemy, especially if the outcome of such actions are particularly amusing. The scrap cities moved and changed, their topography adapting to the cunning whims of numerous war bosses. Strategically strong positions in high ground seized by the Tyranids at great cost suddenly sank to becoming exposed killing grounds, enabling the Orcs to slaughter bioforms there with ease. Enormous mounds of scrap emerged in open ground, overrun by immense swarms of Tyranids. They created warrens of narrow choke points, which evened the odds for outnumbered greenskin defenders. Tyranids outflanked Orc positions in the miles-deep underscrap beneath greenskin cities. Many of these areas were compacted by enormous steam-powered machines, crushing any biohorrors inside. Other parts of the underscrap were hoovered up by enormous magnets and dumped into furnaces as large as small towns to be melted down. Countless Tyranid organisms trapped within the scrap were incinerated. Despite the enormous losses and the great setbacks that Orc machinery caused, the Swarm Lord had reserves enough to continue the invasion. The hive mind cared little for how many of its creatures died, so long as the planet was claimed. The biomass of the dead would be returned to it all the same. The Swarm Lord continued the assault, deploying wave after wave of bioforms of every variety. Biotitans smashed their way through bottlenecks and leveled scrap cities. Fast-moving gene stealers and lictors swept through the underscrap at great speed to avoid being crushed or swept away. Mountains that had been turned into weapons were assaulted by bioships which deluged the peaks in torrents of acidic vomit. The Swarm Lord deployed waves of feeder organisms to begin the process of consumption as soon as possible. Such were the Tyranids' losses, they needed to replenish lost biomass swiftly. With each passing day, more of the Tendrils' bioships arrived. Many thousands were en route to Octaria. Some approached from nearby worlds that had recently fallen to the Tyranids, while others were yet to even pass through the Octaria system. All were bloated with biomass, ready to spawn more organisms. With this constant supply of fresh swarms, and the blockade around the planet holding off greenskin reinforcements, the Swarm Lord's hordes gained momentum.
58, it's never too late. After 2 years in school.
Through all of this, the Swarm Lord never took one step onto the battlefield. Instead, it waited for the right time to strike. When the Tyranids dominated the planet and the Orcs were reduced to a fraction of their former strength. The Herald of the Great Devourer had all the eternal patience of the hive mind, and slowly its plans bore fruit, albeit at enormous cost. Orc hordes were overwhelmed, one by one, though it cost billions of bioforms. The shredded corpses of biotitans littered battlefields all over Octaria. Fields of dead Tyranids were hundreds of meters deep. For all the slaughter the orcs were inflicting, the Overfiend was becoming isolated. Like some oceanic behemoth, waning as it sunk into the lightless depths, the orc forces were gnawed steadily away by the life forms swarming around them. The Overfiend was slowly separated from his champions, who were being picked off one by one. Regardless, the warlord of Octarius was a colossus born for war, an irresistible force, an immovable object who crushed any and all before him. No Tyranid force had yet defeated his host of mega gargants, giant squigoffs, big mobs of stompers, and millions of huge scarboys. Thus far, the Swarmlord had endeavoured to keep the Overfiend occupied, to prevent him from seizing the initiative, costing the tendril dearly, but the time was ripe to slay him for good. Orc resistance elsewhere on Octaria was increasingly sporadic and weakening by the moment. Even with this advantage, overcoming the Overfiend would be an enormous task. A direct assault required so many bioforms to be successful, it might give breathing space for surviving war bosses elsewhere to regather their strength. The Swarmlord summoned countless beasts to him, forming two distinct megaswarms. The first was to surround the Overfiend's army and attack it from all sides. The other was to form a second circle around the battle, acting as a blockade against any orc forces that might attempt to intervene. The Overfiend's hordes had been besieged within an enormous scrap city known to the Greenskins as Megascrap. The Swarmlord committed hundreds of biotitans to the attack. They included Hierophants, Hierojules, serpentine beasts with barbed tails and envenomed fangs, and scorpiad monstrosities, sprouting biocannons as large as an orc truck. Boring worms tunneled beneath the greenskin city, each of the bind creatures as large as a stomper. Scuttling around these immense creatures were bioforms of almost every variety and genus that Hive Fleet Leviathan could spawn. The Tyranids were seemingly numberless, no matter how many the greenskins cut down with ferocious chopper blows, earth-shaking cannon fire, or torrents of ferocious dacker. The orcs could not kill enough. Conversely, for every greenskin slain, every Gorkanaut or Morkanaut rent apart, there was no replacement. The Swarmlord expended Tyrant Guards and Morlocks as it would termagants in any other battle. Orc after orc used up all their ammunition, blunted their axes, or found their buzzsaws blocked with chewed-up meat. Every inch of the battlefield was covered with corpses and lost weapons. Gargants found it difficult to maneuver around the wrecks of their fellows, whereas comparatively agile biotitans clambered over the devastation like nightmarish arachnids. The Swarmlord watched over it all with patience. The Overfiend was all but unstoppable. The number of bioforms he had killed was beyond count, and his power claws, armor, and skin were slick with Tyranid ichor. With each passing second, his tally grew larger, but he was becoming isolated. Even his biggest and meanest scarboys were struggling to keep up with him, and those that still lived bled from many wounds. Then came the moment when the Overfiend, slaying a rampaging Carnifex, suffered a deep wound in his thigh from the monster's death throes. As the Orc Warlord roared in agony, the Swarmlord knew its moment had come. Finally, it took to the field, with hundreds of Tyrant Guards and Carnifexes serving as shields. The Swarmlord and its bodyguard clashed with the Overfiend and his remaining Scarboys. Tyrant Guards were beheaded by great sweeps of immense power axes. Knobs were run through with scything talons. Carnifexes were leapt upon by multiple Scarboys and dragged down. Death Dreads were barreled over by broods of Tyrant Guards, their occupants ripped out of their grotesque contraptions. All the while, the Swarmlord duelled with the Overfiend, content to let the colossal greenskin exhaust itself by using its speed and agility to avoid the war boss's strikes. The herald of the great devourer kept moving, parrying blows with its bone blades and making lunges whenever necessary to break up the Overfiend's momentum. It used its multiple arms to great advantage, landing several blows by making it impossible for the wounded greenskin to know where the next strike was coming from. The Overfiend fought with unmatched ferocity. He never once paused or slowed down. Eventually, however, through his bleeding and wild attacks, the war boss left the slightest opening. The Swarmlord exploited it, severing the power cables to one of the greenskin's claws with a cut from a bone blade. Even the mighty Overfiend could not wield such a grotesquely massive claw without hydraulic assistance. Now it dragged at his side, dead weight. The Tyrant Lord of the Hivemind moved in for the kill. Shedding its earlier restraint, it hacked and slashed at the pinned Orc Warlord, easily avoiding the greenskin's desperate swipes with his remaining claw. At long last, the Swarmlord drove two of its bone blades down on the Overfiend's head, smashing it open and sending blood, ichor, and fragments of shattered helmet everywhere. Finally, the herald of the great devourer buried its maw in the Overfiend's open skull and feasted on the Orc Warlord's brain. The greenskin was truly dead. Victory was finally Leviathan's. Classified document. The Swarmlord. Account of Tyranid command specimen identified in the Octaria sector. I thought it wise to inform you, Lord Critman, that the Tyranid command specimen described as the Swarmlord by Imperial forces has been positively identified in the Octaria system. As you will see from the summary I've composed below, this creature's presence in the region has significant ramifications for the wider war effort in and around the Octarian Empire. Ever your most loyal servant, JBZ. Since the Tyranids were first properly identified, there have been creatures of that foul race that have inspired more fear than any other. They have been called the Tyrant Lord of the Hivemind, the Herald of the Great Devourer, the Destroyer of the Kalar Empire, the Doom of Galantaris, and the Undoing of all things. After careful study, we believe that all of these monsters are in fact one and the same, the bioform most commonly referred to as the Swarmlord. The Swarmlord is, so far as we can surmise, the very pinnacle of the Hive Tyrant genus. Its power, in comparison to that of a common Hive Tyrant, so much as such a thing exists in such an adaptable race, is akin to a Hive Tyrant in relation to a Termagant. The Swarmlord's appearance on the battlefield appears to be stress-induced, when lesser synapse creatures or biological adaptations cannot overwhelm certain prey alone. The Swarmlord's purpose, it seems, is to outthink its enemies. The creature has more autonomy than any other Tyranid bioform we have observed. We believe that the Swarmlord has destroyed entire civilizations and has likely been a part of the Tyranids' consumption strategies since before the species came to our galaxy. Since arriving here, we can confirm that the Swarmlord has overseen the absorption of 24 worlds of the Hodar sector in 4 months, has wiped out the tridents of the Atox Adeptus Astartes chapter, has overrun the Yeluna hegemony, and destroyed the Tigerish race. We have uncorroborated reports of dozens more similar events. These actions have taken place over several centuries, within every known Hive fleet, even after the creature has been reported killed. This suggests that the Swarmlord's link with the Hivemind transcends physical limitations, such as the distances that separate the different Hive fleets. Though it is immensely challenging to demonstrate, we believe it possible for the Tyranids to spawn the Swarmlord in multiple locations, with multiple Hive fleets simultaneously. See attached files on the silencing of Ergothren, Incident 13-0X, and the accounts of Lord Admiral Hexrus Koroto Prin, the 14th, for further information regarding this hypothesis. All of this combined suggests that the Hive fleets may be more capable of coordinating on a galactic scale than originally thought. Can a Swarm Lord learn from the experiences of another fighting on the other side of the galaxy in real time? Can the Tyranids form a galaxy-wide strategy, managed by multiple brains in multiple locations? Such questions are terrifying to ponder. Classified Document 61267-L. Summary of ongoing events in the Octarian region. My Lord Critman, here is my précis of key events in the ongoing Octarian War. This summary is followed by accounts of other battles, including the ongoing struggles on Emush and the Corexil entanglement. I stress that the events in the Octarian region are deteriorating as I write. Within a matter of ship weeks, I expect all of what follows to be out of date to the point of uselessness. Further updates will follow on a regular basis. Ever your most faithful servant, JBZ. The Pancalis subsector. The situation in the Pancalis subsector is extremely critical. Following the loss of the Anilani, Karnak, and Semithis systems, and now the Zizor and Savadosha systems are exposed to attack. If Eva falls, one of the Xenos races will have broken clean through the cordon. As a result, neighboring subsectors have rapidly escalated their fortifications and armament efforts. Many worlds are carrying out mass conscription, which has caused considerable civil unrest. Though Pancalis was the first subsector bordering the Octarian Empire to face full-scale Xenos onslaughts, others are beginning to have challenges. The Hrengen, Latus Thea, and Erin subsectors are all under attack, albeit these assaults are at much earlier stages. The situation for the Cordon is growing so dire that I understand Inquisitor Sahansun is seeking an audience with Rabute Gilliman. Whether or not he will be successful in this is another matter. It does seem clear, however, that between combating direct assaults by greenskin hordes, digging in against Tyranid onslaughts, and combating the overspill of the ongoing war between these two races, remaining Imperial forces are spread thin all along this multi-system front. Separately to this strategic matter, our agents have been able to collect hundreds of samples of dead Xenos for study amidst the general disorder of the situation. These include Tyranids from dozens of genuses, Orcoids ranging from Gretchen to so-called Scar Boys, scores of Squig varieties, as well as a handful of Drukhari. I must say it is amongst the latter collection that the greater prize can be found. Stormtrooper Company 3-1 Beta recovered a live Drukhari homunculus. She, if such terms are even applicable to such deformed creatures, is being transported to your location as I write. If even a tenth of the rumours we have heard of these creatures are true, there is virtually no limit to the knowledge extractable from her. Though this is more speculation on my part. She may even prove valuable in solving the Tiamat problem. The Valoria incident. We have lost contact with virtually all of our agents within Inquisitor Van Roff's forces. The most recent reports we received suggest much of the Inquisitor's martial strength was caught in an Orc attack, surrounded and destroyed. I understand that a handful of dropships successfully escaped the planet, though at this point it is unclear who survived. We have also lost track of Van Roff's flotilla and those of his allies. I have instructed my acolytes to reach out to our friends in the Munga dynasty to find out more information and see, since her disappearance, which of Mung's assets they have claimed, if any. Such acquisitions would strengthen our associates, and therefore us in turn. Basilia was wealthy, even compared to her own family. It is likely that some may resort to military means to claim her riches. I will endeavour to ensure this does not happen. Intrafamilial strife is the last thing we need, especially with the rare assets of a Xeno-Savant dynasty at stake. Most crucially of all, we need word of what happened to the Orc crown device Van Roff was trying to exploit. It is entirely possible that the vast influx of greenskins was drawn upon the Inquisitor's position by the very crown he sought to activate. though this is a mere educated guess. Regardless, I submit we make it a priority to recover this device. There is little indication that it has been discovered by the Orcs. It is clear that Van Roth lacked the skill, the will, and the resources to make use of the crown. But we will not make his mistakes. I have taken the liberty of dispatching search and recovery teams, as well as contacting our allies in the Death Watch. The Space Marines may be unwilling, given the fate of their battle brothers with Van Roth, but with the crown vulnerable to enemy hands, they have little choice but to reclaim it, even if I have to tell them that we only seek to destroy it. Sigma Olstari. The Forge world of Sigma Olstari and the rest of its system is now in a stable condition, though this is thanks only to the efforts of High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars, the rogue trader Ivor Falamore, and High Admiral Hurricane Ajon of Indomitus Crusade Fleet Primus. There is still ongoing fighting in most of the system's worlds. There is also the ongoing risk of battles between these enemy forces spilling over into otherwise pacified areas. Fabricator General Phlogostock has commenced a massive rebuilding effort throughout the entire system. Overall, our analysis is that Sigma Olstari is capable of holding out against further attacks in the short term. However, this is dependent on the continued presence of those reinforcement fleets that came to the system's aid. It is unlikely that Helbrecht or Ajon will wish to remain in the system for long. Both of their forces are crusades, supposed to be ever on the move in search of new targets and battles, and there is no shortage of these in and around the Octarian Empire. However, we may reasonably hope that the High Marshal will command some amongst his worshipful hosts to remain and bolster Sigma Olstari's defences. Reports indicate that both commanders have already dispatched probing missions looking for new threats to engage. If the potential of their leaving the system does not create a conflict with Phlogostock, any request from Ajon to replenish her ranks with troops from Sigma Olstari will. Part of the Indomitus Crusade's modus operandi is to gather new forces from any worlds they liberate. The Fabricator General will be most reluctant to relinquish a single Skitarii to fight elsewhere, while his world is still recovering from numerous apocalyptic invasions. Phlogostock is already furious. None of the 3 reinforcement fleets came to him as a result of the efforts of Inquisitor Sahansson. The Fabricator argues that the Cordon has failed him, and that the guarantees it offered are meaningless. Not only has Phlogostock dedicated much of his system's industrial output to its own defences, he is actively withholding resources from other systems in protest. The ramifications of this could be very severe indeed for neighbouring regions. This act might well be self-defeating, for Sigma Olstari would be left cut off completely if surrounding systems fell to the Orcs or Tyranids. Sahansson may even decide to abandon the Forge world. The question I ask is, at what point do the resources committed to preserving Sigma Olstari's system outweigh the cost of keeping it secure? Octarius. It is quite possible that the most momentous event of the entire war has transpired in the Octarius system, on the world of Octaria. Though only one of a dozen observers we had in the region still alive, combined data supplied over time has given us a strong picture of what has happened. It appears that a fresh Tyranid invasion tore into the system, supplied with biomass taken from nearby worlds. Biofleets with unnumbered ships operated with uncanny coordination, overrunning all of the system's worlds in short order and isolating Octaria completely. We believe that the Overfiend of Octarius was slain. Quite possibly, at the claws of the creature we have identified as the Swarm Lord. In the weeks following this event, we have tracked a noticeable change in greenskin behavior, spreading outwards from Octaria. Infighting has increased. No fewer than 6 Orc warlords have declared themselves the Overfiend of Octarius and are gathering swathes of Orc warbands and tribes to themselves. Already the Tyranids are taking advantage of this. The volume of biomass available to them in the wake of the Overfiend's defeat is so immense that it will be able to fuel huge waves of consumption. I have zero doubt that the Tyranids of High Fleet Leviathan have the upper hand in the Xenos War of the Octarian Empire. I do not know what effect this will have on mankind's cause, but it cannot be good. I must recommend we pass our tidings, anonymously and through appropriate channels, of course, to select Imperial authorities. They must be warned. And with that, we close our exploration of the Octarius War. What a lovely bit of lore. Really expands on everything. Thank you, everybody who's watching. Thank you to everybody who's been giving likes, comments, and hypes on the videos. Really, really appreciate that. I'm almost out. I'm almost free of Algo Jail. The machine god is almost assuaged, and that's all down to you. And if you can continue to do that, I'd massively appreciate it. Also, do let me know in the comments any kind of lore you'd like me to cover. I'm happy to take inspiration, shall we say. Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this. Lots of different things going on there. I like it. It's more of a sort of like
it's a wrap.
Spanning thing rather than a single battle. You've got like a whole front line being described, and really goes into the sort of chaos of things that are going on in the Imperium. I'm sort of on a bit of a catch-up because of everything that occurred with the channel, nuking it and whatnot. I'm a bit behind on all the lore, so we're just on catch-up now.
Fireworks
so
still.
Lucky for you, you get to delve into all these things that have occurred in this era, Indomitus, and so on. But yes, thank you all again. Please do remember to like the video, subscribe if you're not subscribed, share it with people you think might enjoy it. Give me a like and a hype.
Yeah,
and to everybody
guys.
who's supporting me and the channel as a patron on Patreon, I should say, and as a channel member, lads, I cannot thank you enough. You guys are the
We're
true
gonna wrap it up, you
superheroes. And
guys.
to everybody who's been giving super chats
It's been a long day for me. It's been a long one for me, you guys. I got up early and I did some editing. Got some stuff done. We're gonna be calling it a night. We did some painting. It was all right. We did all right. We did good for the most part. If anybody likes Jesus music, I got some new songs over on the channel to the Chief Musician. Check it out. It's pretty good. It's all right. All right, you guys. So tomorrow we'll be back. Stargate, SGU. Last 2 episodes of the series. That's the series finale, you guys. It's going to be a wrap. What is up with this? There it is. I think we're better now. Alright. So tomorrow, last 2 episodes, plus some special features that you'll be able to hear and see because we do. And then Thursday, we'll play some games. Friday, watch party, not too sure what. But yeah, dude. Thank you guys for being here, for hanging out, for chilling. This was the Warhammer Hangout Paint Party chill time. Francois, Bella Truth, thank you guys for being here, for hanging out. Lurkers, backgrounders, tricksters, thugs, leeches. Appreciate you guys, everybody's time. Yeah, we'll be back before you know it. Life's too short. Not enough time for everything we need. Do with what you can, I guess, or something. All right, you guys. That's a wrap. I will catch you guys here on the next one. Peace.